Hey Raven, I'm from England and I've been listening to you for a while now, and would like to say thank you so much for doing what you do. I've had a few rubbish years that I'm now starting to come out the other side of, and you've played a massive part in distracting me or helping me to relax. Well, thank you very much, and I hope things do get better for you. I've got a creepy and 100% true ghost story that I would like to share with you. I've held on to this for a long time, and have never told anyone else because I didn't want to sound crazy. Before the main event, I need to take you back in time to 2001. I was 16, and started regularly visiting my boyfriend's home so I could spend time with him and his family. This house layout had stairs that went straight in front of you as you opened the front door, and the living room/kitchen area was to the right of the front door. One evening, we were sat watching TV in the living room, and I heard something that sounded like a person running up the stairs next to the living room. I said, "Oh, is there someone else here?" And they all gave me a funny look and said no. Then it happened again the next time I was there. I thought to myself, okay, maybe I'm hearing the neighbors. And then I realized that there are no neighbors attached on that side. And even if there was, that walk that I heard with the footsteps on is on the wall the stairs are on, so we wouldn't have been able to hear the neighbors. The third time it happened, my boyfriend's nan was there and said, "Oh, there he goes again." I looked at her and said, "So you hear it too?" And she was like, "Oh yeah, this house is haunted, and we often hear something going up or down the stairs." My boyfriend said that he and his mom didn't want to freak me out, so they didn't want to mention it. Now we can fast forward 7 years. I'm 23 and it's 2008. Me and my boyfriend are separated and I'm in a new relationship. The house that was my boyfriend's childhood home, and creepy stair footsteps house, has been being rented out for a number of years. I was looking for somewhere for myself and my new partner to rent, and my ex-mother-in-law suggested that we rent the house off her as it was in the area that we needed. We agreed and moved in the next month. I'd completely forgotten about the nightly creepy footsteps until my new partner said the one day, "Gosh, aren't the stairs in this house cold?" As they said those words, all those creepy nights came back to me. But I didn't say anything, thinking, of course, there's an innocent explanation for what I had heard. The first week went by fine, and we were sat in the living room, and I felt like I'd gone back in time when we sat there. Yet again, I heard someone very aggressively running up the stairs. This time, however, my new partner looked at me and then jumped up and ran to the stairs looking for someone. I had to explain that no one's there. It's just something that happens in this house. The stairs are haunted, apparently, to which they got me to explain what I knew. A month or so later, me and my partner had an argument. It wasn't a bad argument, just bickering over something silly, and as I was talking, I ran down the stairs into the kitchen. I then heard the picture on the top of the stairs shatter with a bang. I went back up the stairs and said, very mature, as my partner was coming onto the landing to say the same to me. It was at that point we both realized that neither of us had broken the picture. In fact, neither of us were even near it. It just exploded, even though it had been there a month perfectly fine. The next incident happened when I felt a very cold gust of wind as I went to talk down the stairs, and literally got pushed. Or that's what it felt like. From the top to the bottom. I landed at the front door at the bottom of the stairs in a heap with finger marks on my arm. I kept trying to work out how I would put those finger marks on myself, but there was no way I could place my hand in the correct position. So where did they come from? It really freaked me out. It freaked me out enough to start looking at other homes to rent. Not long after, I was hoovering and mopping downstairs. The wooden floor at the bottom of the stairs was drying, and as I walked over it to go upstairs, I noticed a massive footprint. Too big to be anyone that I knew, or most people, to be honest. It was honestly huge. I mopped over it again, thinking it was a print that had somehow re-shown up, but it didn't matter how much I mopped it. It was still there. I placed my foot inside the giant footprint for size reference, and it freaked me out so much that I literally grabbed my keys and trainers and left the house, and refused to go back in. It wasn't long after this that we decided to move, and my ex-mother-in-law told me that nobody who had rented it had stayed there very long, with tales of creepy things happening around the staircase. I honestly think that there might be some kind of portal where the stairs are in that home, and it's an area for a lot of activity that, no matter how much you try to ignore it, just doesn't want to be ignored. I wanted to share a story with you about something that happened to me back in the winter of 2021. I was having a rough time between a rough breakup, the stress of work and family, not to mention the state of the world at that time. I wanted to get away but not spend too much money, so I resorted to staying at this old cabin that my uncle owned. I'd gone there plenty of times as a kid with my family, and I loved it. It was secluded, no one else around for miles, surrounded by nothing but trees. All of us kids got older and visited less, so he opened it up to anyone in the family if they wanted to use it. I asked him if anyone was there, and since it was free, I told him I was going to use it for the weekend, and he told me where to find the key. But it's what I experienced there that changed the way I felt about that once quiet getaway. The first few days were uneventful, which was perfect. I went hiking around the property one day and tried to identify some animal tracks that I found in the snow. I gathered some of my own firewood, chopping it up like I remember doing as a kid. Then I made myself food, and I ate by the fire with a book. The only electronic I had was my phone, and service was non-existent out there anyways, so it was like I was completely unplugged, and I loved it. I was enjoying the silence, and already feeling better and more centered. On the third night, I was on the back patio smoking before I got ready for bed. It was no longer snowing, but there was a good couple of inches on the ground at that point. The air was completely still, no wind. It was one of those silent winter nights, and I loved it. As I stood on the patio, I started hearing what sounded like whistling coming from the tree line about 50 yards away. At first, when I wasn't giving it my full attention, I thought it was random whistles. But then I could make out a distinct melody. This was some kind of tune, but I couldn't quite place it. My first thought was that it may have been a hunter, maybe someone else who lived in one of the other cabins, and maybe they got lost or were just passing through the property lines. It was still in the dead of winter and at night, so I called out to them, asking if they were okay. The whistling stopped immediately. I waited, thinking maybe they were about to respond, maybe they were trying to find where the talking was coming from, maybe they were just going to walk up to the cabin instead. But then there was nothing. After a few minutes of nothing, I figured maybe I had spooked them or they had moved on. I stayed where I was to finish my smoke before going back in, but then the whistling started up again. This time it was coming from a different spot in the tree line, a little further to the left of where I first heard it. This time I didn't call out. Since it moved, I figured they probably didn't know where I was. Maybe I did spook them. Or maybe they didn't even hear me and continued to walk by. I didn't call out again, but instead just listened. The same melody was being whistled. It would stop in the same spot and then repeat. It did this 3 times. It was almost eerie not seeing where it was coming from and having it repeat, so I put out my cigarette and went back in early. I got ready for bed and made my place on the couch by the fire. There were 3 bedrooms, but it was warmer by the fire, so I just decided to sleep there. As I started to drift off, I started hearing that whistling again. I opened my eyes and listened again to the tune, It sounded really close at that point, which was quite frankly a bit alarming. And to be as loud and clear as it was, it had to be close to the cabin, which meant that it was too close. This was still private property. I could understand hunters getting lost or just wanting to walk through, but to be that close to the cabin was not okay. I got up and turned on the outside light and opened the front door. The whistling was just as loud, but I couldn't see a single thing out there. No signs of anyone. I tried the back door, same result. The whistling also sounded just as close from the front and the back. Then I heard the sounds of a branch or something snapping like someone walked over it. At that point, I was getting a bit freaked out. There was no way the person couldn't see me standing in the porch lights, yet I couldn't see them. And out there, it was highly likely that they had some kind of weapon on them. I shouted that this was private property and that they shouldn't be here, and again the whistling stopped. I listened again and I could hear the crunch of snow under someone's shoes. Then the whistling started again, but this time it sounded like it was coming from behind me, inside the cabin. I swung around and there was nothing there. No one. I shut the door, locking it, and then I went and checked all the windows, grabbed the fire poker, and then locked myself in one of the bedrooms. This had gone from a therapeutic getaway to a creepy horror movie, and I was not having it. I stayed in that room the entire night, every little sound causing me to look around. I didn't sleep until I saw the sun come up. After just a couple hours of sleep, I got dressed and went to check the outside of the cabin. I don't know what I was expecting to find, but I was hoping for something to prove that I wasn't crazy. In the end, I found nothing. It hadn't snowed that night either, and there was no new accumulation anywhere. It was clear on the path that I made. My footprints were still visible on the back patio, and those were the only footprints. There were no footprints anywhere near the cabin. That was impossible. The whistling sounded close enough to sound like they were standing on the porch with me. There had to be footprints somewhere visible, so how was it possible that I couldn't see any? And that was the final straw for me. It was too freaky, so I left. I packed up, and once I got back home, I texted my uncle telling him that I left early, and he asked me if everything was all right. I explained the cabin was fine and considered not mentioning it to him, but he'd always been open-minded, so I decided to tell him. I started explaining how there was some weird stuff happening, and then his text stopped for about half an hour. I thought maybe he was thinking I was being dramatic and started feeling pretty silly myself. Then, he finally responded asking, "Was it the whistling?" I was shook. I didn't mention it, so he must have experienced the same thing. Did that mean that he knew who was doing it? Or that he experienced it too? After another 10 to 15 minutes, my uncle sent me a link to a video that I watched. To my shock, it was the same tune that I heard at the cabin. It was Stardust by Hoagie Carmichael. The whistling part in the song was the exact tune that I heard out there. Listening to that in those dark woods, secluded and alone, it was terrifying. My uncle then called me and explained how he had heard the same whistling for years. He even said that my dad, his brother, witnessed it, but no one knows why it's happening, or even where it's coming from. The closest thought they had ever come to was that based on the area, there was an old logger business in the nearby vicinity back in the 20s. The building has since been torn down and the land sold, but my uncle thinks that maybe it was someone who worked there that may have died in an accident, or maybe got stuck in a blizzard and is now wandering those woods. I could believe that theory, because the fact that it sounded like it was coming from everywhere and there were no footprints, I don't know what else fits. I'm just relieved that the whistling wasn't in my head, that I wasn't going insane. But at the same time, I don't know which would be worse. But at least I know now if I go back out there, I'll at least have some tunes to look forward to. In August of 1914, my home country of Ireland, still part of Britain at the time, joined World War I. From what I've heard, we didn't do much, but it was better to have us and not need us than to need us and not have us. I bring this up because this story comes from my great-granduncles, from here referred to as granduncles, friends as told to me by my grandfather. I got permission from their families, not them specifically, because it's been over 100 years now. They're all dead, to tell the story. The only thing I must say is that all the names have been changed for privacy, and that the story is a second-hand account of 3 different people's memories on some things, so forgive me if the story seems rather odd in how it's framed. My granduncle was stationed somewhere at sea. I don't have the exact location, but it's important to know that they were at sea for the entirety of their time at war. Unlike my great-grandfather, who was considered a war hero and got a letter of recognition from King George V for his service, my granduncle got no recognition like that. Him and his 3 friends, that I'll just call Shorty, Brick, and Joe. Shorty was a small, aggressive man, Brick was a large and powerful man, and Joe was average. Proper names, then. Average build, average intelligence, the works. Anyway, the 3 of them were on the same vessel at sea when it sunk. I don't have the exact details of what happened, as they've changed from who was telling the story. Joe said they were all immediately ordered to abandon ship. Brick says they were ordered to stay and fight until the damage was too bad that they had to go, and Shorty never gave much detail. But either way, the ship was going down and they had to run. They hopped into a lifeboat and managed to escape out into open water. While they were safe mostly from enemy fire, they had other issues: food and water. They had on them a flask of rum, and being Irish men, they took to using that as hydration. I'm not saying it didn't work, but it was like putting a dirty Band-Aid on a gash in the belly. It's so little help short-term, and so dangerous long-term. It took 2 days before they got any food in the form of a fish that one of them had grabbed from the water. They were so hungry they picked it clean, but it was still so little food. That was when one of them asked the most difficult and dangerous questions you ask when lost at sea. Shorty says it was Joe, Joe says it was Shorty, and Brick says it was either Joe or my granduncle. But one of the men said, "Should we draw straws to see who gets eaten?" They used the ribs from the fish as makeshift straws. 4 pencil-thin ribs to see who was going to make it or not. Shorty drew the longest, Brick drew the second longest, Joe drew the second shortest, and my granduncle the shortest. I'll spare many of the details, but he was killed and eaten by the men. 5 days after they were first stranded, they were rescued and brought back to Dublin, where the local community hailed them as heroes. Nothing amazing or fancy. I don't even think it ended up in the paper, but people all through the neighborhood loved them, all except for my granduncle's wife and kids. They insisted that there was no drawing of straws, that my granduncle would never agree to such a thing. The story would have ended here, but this last part comes from my grandfather. Joe didn't have a family. He didn't have a wife or kids or even siblings, so on his deathbed in the 1980s, my grandfather visited him. Joe told my grandfather this part of the story. Apparently, my granduncle, according to Joe, didn't draw the short straw. It was Brick. Joe said Brick, angry and afraid, then killed my granduncle. They weren't going to kill 2 people, were they? Let alone the biggest and strongest? Brick threatened the other 2 men and made them swear to never tell anyone. Joe was the last one alive at this point. Shorty was just another casualty in World War II, and Brick was killed by an infected dog bite. Joe, then, at his end, just wanted somebody to know. I used to love fireworks. My birthday is on July 7th, so I often got fireworks for my birthday and would shoot off any extras that we had from the 4th. Having your own fireworks show for your birthday was really cool as a kid, but then one 4th of July celebration turned into a nightmare that really turned me off of fireworks. On top of my family going overboard on the fireworks, our whole street would have a block party for the 4th of July. Every year, everyone would pull money together for a massive display. And I don't mean some cute little fountain or sparklers galore. No, we're talking professional grade stuff. Everyone would gather in the cul-de-sac. Some adults were cooking. Everyone was eating. All the kids were shooting stuff off during the day and the start of the night. Then, once we were finished, the adults would then set off their large displays for everyone to enjoy. But one year, Mr. Henderson decided he wanted to one-up everyone. He went to the next state over and spent a ton of money on firework packs. The problem with this was that the stuff that he got wasn't legal in our state, and probably not legal in general. He went to some random Joe that he claimed to be friends with that made his own firework displays. I could tell they were homemade because they didn't look like the stuff we normally got. It didn't have the wrappers on the sides with names, it didn't have the bright arrows pointing towards the wicks or instructions. It looked like it was just wrapped in gray paper and then wrapped again in plastic wrap. Just looking at them made me nervous. It certainly didn't look safe. But most of the other adults were excited to see it, and my dad even asked for his friend's contact info to get his own the next year. I trusted the adults, especially my parents, so I told myself that everything would be fine. So that night went on as normal. People gathered in their small groups, the adults talking, including us kids showing off our bravery as we held 2 or more sparklers at once. But then Mr. Henderson started talking about showing off some of his stuff. It was dark at this point, but not too late. Around 9 or 10 p.m., I believe. I was sitting in the chair next to my mom when Henderson went to the little platform the Martins made for the fireworks. He lit it with a lighter, and then walked back toward his wife. I watched the wick as it sparked, getting shorter and shorter, until it reached the firework. Then it stopped. Many laughed, as it was common to have that one firework that gets weird and doesn't light. Mr. Henderson approached the platform again. I saw the lighter flick on, a quick spark from the wick, and then immediately followed by a boom. I jumped as the fireworks shot up, and Mr. Henderson jumped back. It popped in the sky in pretty colors, and everyone loved it. They laughed and teased him, but said that it was worth it, and we all moved on. It startled me, but the adults all seemed to be okay with it, so I felt like we were safe. That everything was okay. But something still wasn't sitting right with me. Then, a little later on, Mr. Henderson wanted to shoot off another one. It started the same. He carried this bulk brick up to the platform, my dad with him, holding a flashlight. He lit the firework and they all backed up. Once again, I watched the wick spark and braced myself for that loud boom. But this one didn't have problems lighting up at all. In fact, this one blew up before the wick even finished. Unfortunately, this one didn't do what it was supposed to. It exploded outwards instead of upwards. And some shot towards my mom and I, and some shot to our right, and some towards the back. At first we jumped, and there was nervous laughter about that one, and how he should get his money back. But what no one had noticed was that one of the explosions had shot towards the fireworks stockpile. There was a burning mortar that didn't burst open when it shot outwards, until it hit those fireworks. Everyone was talking and laughing, and then there was an even larger boom. Fireworks, all different kinds, began exploding in every direction. Projectiles screamed through the air from the fireworks at us. I watched as people jumped, trying to avoid them. My mom pushed my younger brother out of the way of one of them while another shot toward us, hitting me in the thigh. It burned right through my shorts, and I remember screaming as I felt it burning. I tried patting it out until finally I just took them off and ran to our porch. Listening to everyone screaming, the fire, kids crying, all the while the fireworks just continued going off. It was nightmare fuel. I stood there not knowing what to do. I was only 12, but I felt like I needed to do something. Save someone? Try to put out the fireworks? What was I supposed to do? I was sobbing as I went to get the home phone and called 911. I brought it back outside, still standing pantless, explaining to them what I saw. I could only imagine how horrifying it sounded to that person that got my call. A child crying with people screaming in the background. While they were on the phone, I could hear sirens coming and I thought that they got there fast. Apparently someone else had phoned it in too. The operator did their best to calm me down and help me with my burn. It at least kept my mind occupied. Then I let them go when I heard my mom screaming for me. I ran back out, holding the paper towels to the crater in my leg to let my mom know that I was okay. She was walking up the porch, holding my little brother who was crying too. She told me to watch him and that she would be right back. I brought him inside where he pointed to his face. He must have been hot with stuff falling from the sky because he had soot sprinkled on his face, and part of his hair was singed, and his eye was a very red, watery mess. I was worried that something got in his eye and he was complaining about it burning. I wet down a rag to wipe his face and try to soothe it, treating it similar to what the operator had told me to do. Once he was calmed down enough, I turned on the TV for him, put some shorts on finally, and went back outside. And there was a fire truck now trying to put out the fire in the hedges of our neighbor's house. And there was a car alarm going off, and I saw an ambulance and paramedics treating someone lying on the ground. The person on the ground was Mr. Henderson. He had tried to put out the fireworks stockpile, and when he was close to it, something else exploded and covered the front of his body. He had some pretty bad burns all over. My dad was also trying to help and got burned, but not anywhere near as bad. He put his arm up to block his face, but had some pretty bad burns on his arm. One of the teenagers got some severe burns, and another one ended up having to cut her hair pretty short because something landed in it and actually caught it on fire. Her hair was very thick and long, and that's actually who I had heard screaming. And she was trying to put it out, but she kept swinging her hair around, so they had to pull her to the ground and stomp on her hair. By the time the fireworks were finally and completely waterlogged, it had been at least an hour, but felt so much longer. It was hot and humid as is, but with the smoke and that awful sulfur smell, it was so hard to breathe outside. This was some time ago, but it became pretty clear pretty fast what had happened. If you didn't already put it together, the fireworks Mr. Henderson got were not professional, and they were nowhere near safe. They were just made by some guy in his garage, thinking he knew what he was doing. Stuff didn't light because the wick wasn't properly connected, and most of the stuff wasn't even packed properly, which is what led to them exploding outward instead of up. A lot of people were rightfully upset, and several kids had been hurt. Mr. Henderson especially was upset and incredibly remorseful. He ended up reporting the guy, and it was in our local newspaper. He'd been using and modifying old mining explosives that were incredibly unstable. Not to mention, this guy didn't know anything about that kind of stuff. I actually heard my dad talking about it one time. Some of us have lasting scars. I have a dark spot on my leg. My brother made it out okay after his eyes got flushed out and people's hair grew back, but the trauma never left me. And since then, I've honestly been terrified of fireworks. I will still light off some of the small stuff like smoke bombs or sparklers, just simple things like that. The fun little fountains that moved on the ground, those parachutes, all that. I couldn't watch it anymore. Anytime one moved, I would damn near have a panic attack that it was going to fly toward me or someone else. They did continue to do the fireworks display in our neighborhood, but when it got dark and they started doing all the big stuff, I would just go back inside. I was hoping that once I got older I would grow out of it, but I still have a fear of fireworks. I can now sit outside and watch the little fountains go off, but anything else, I still can't do it. I don't blame Mr. Henderson, but I do just wish people would take fireworks safety seriously. If you want to shoot them off, if you want to celebrate whatever, it doesn't have to be this never-before-seen show. Buy the stuff from certified places. It's really not worth someone's life or health just to have a bigger and louder boom. Hi, Raven. I hope you're finished moving and all settled in. It's so not a fun chore overall. It's definitely not fun. Mostly settled in, completely moved. This story began with a lovely invitation from a friend I hadn't seen in many years. She and her husband had purchased an old 3-story Victorian home in San Francisco. My friend, who I'll call Marcy, wanted to catch up in person, visit an art exhibit we were both interested in, and catch several other activities around the area. We'd been college roommates at one time, and we had much in common. I had missed her company throughout the years, so this was an invitation I eagerly made arrangements to make happen in my schedule. I took an evening flight and arrived fairly late at night, so we had a nightcap while marveling at how time passes. Soon, Marcy showed me the guest bedroom before going off to bed herself. The moment Marcy left the room, I could feel that I was being watched. I've had the feeling of being watched many times before, but this time it was the strongest I'd ever felt. If I had turned around quickly and seen a full-on apparition, I would not have been at all surprised. But I only felt a presence. No apparition appeared. Regardless of the uncomfortable feeling of being watched, I got ready for bed. The only light in the room was a small hanging light over a mirror that was on, but quite dim. As I was ready to get into bed, I went to turn off the light, but I couldn't find any on or off switch at the base of the light as one would expect. I tried the electrical switch on the wall. It didn't connect to anything. The light stayed on and no other light responded. And since it was such a dim light, I gave up and decided I would just sleep with it on and ask Marcy about it in the morning. I got into bed and closed my eyes, and suddenly I heard a click, and the light went out. I was left in the dark with an urge to say thank you, but I was somewhat fearful that I might hear a voice answer back with, "You're welcome." So I remained silent. The next morning, with the sun streaming in the window over the bay, I investigated the light. I had to know what was up with it. There was a long cord that was hidden down the back of a mirror that I hadn't noticed the night before. On the cord was a kind of on/off switch one has to roll with the thumb. I then rolled the switch on, as it made the clicking sound I had heard in bed. Then I rolled it off again. Same click again. All the while, the continuous feeling of being watched pervaded. That feeling would never leave the entirety of my visit in that guest bedroom. I didn't bring the matter up about the feeling of being watched or the light situation with Marcy. We were having too much fun and all that other stuff seemed too weird. Plus, I knew Marcy and her husband to be skeptics. After I returned home, I began second-guessing my experience. So, I bit the bullet and called Marcy. I told her that I needed to ask her something, but that she might think I'm crazy. I said, "Marcy, has anyone ever told you that your house is haunted?" To my utter surprise, she laughed and said, "Didn't I tell you? Yes, it's haunted. That's how we got the house so insanely inexpensive." She explained that the real estate agent revealed that it was haunted when she and her husband were looking at it. So she went inside and told whoever was there that if they let her and her husband live there, The ghost or ghosts could stay. So, I asked about the light. Was it on a motion detector? The answer was no. Was it on a timer? Again, the answer was no. Marcy said emphatically that the only way to turn it off or on is to roll the switch on the cord. I told her about the feeling of being watched, and she congratulated me on sticking it out, saying they had once hired a house sitter who bailed after the first night. I did stick it out. I wasn't keen on being watched so intently, but I stuck it out because I've never felt this ghost was malevolent. Just highly curious about the new guest. And actually helpful in giving me a good night's sleep in the darkened room. This happened in 2004, but I remember it as if it was yesterday. I was 20 at the time. My roommate Stephanie had a cat named Spider that had gotten out, and we were both devastated. I felt particularly responsible since I was the one who had opened the door when he made his escape, but she didn't hold it against me. Anyway, I was having trouble sleeping and decided I was going to go out to search for Spider, as well as hang up some of the lost cat posters we had made that day. I grabbed a flashlight, a bag of cat treats, and was off. This would have been just after midnight, but we lived in what I thought of as a safe suburban area, so I didn't feel scared. I had walked at night many times without issues. Things started off nice enough. It was a warm, clear night with no moon. This made it particularly dark in areas that weren't illuminated by streetlights, but I didn't mind. I walked along, shining my flashlight around, shaking the cat treats as I went. We had already put up posters everywhere around our homes, so I was headed off a few streets over near a park that we hadn't gotten to yet. Once I was in the area, I started to stop at every light pole to pin up a poster. As I was working my way toward the park, I heard the unmistakable sound of a vehicle coming my way. Something loud with a rumbling engine. I didn't think much of it at the time, though. It wasn't until I saw a big red pickup truck slowing as it came towards me that I stopped what I was doing. I suddenly had a bad feeling in the glare of the headlights. I was unable to see who was inside, but I just had a bad feeling. That feeling only got worse as the truck slowed to a stop right next to where I was standing. The window rolled down, and a middle-aged guy with a receding hairline and a scruffy face leered out at me. He asked me what I was doing. I told him I was looking for a lost cat. He nodded and asked if I would like to ride around with him and he could help me look. I declined and told him I was fine with walking. He then asked if he could walk with me, and I once again politely declined. This is when his attitude soured. His face twisted into a dark expression. His eyes were pits of pure hate. He then called me a word that rhymes with witch. I backed up, looking around and realizing how completely alone I was. There weren't many houses near that particular stretch of road, just a wooded area in the park that I was headed toward. I decided to get out of there and took off running. Luckily for me, I was pretty decent at track in high school, and those days weren't too far behind me yet. Of course, I couldn't run faster than his truck, but I could run places that he couldn't go. I made my way home by going through backyards, and even had to hop a few fences, but that was fine. I just wanted to be away from him. He tried his best to follow me from the street, but eventually lost me. The sound of that big diesel engine was nightmare fuel for quite a while after this. When I got to my house, he was nowhere to be seen. Much to my relief, he had been unable to track me. I locked the door behind me, plopped down on the floor, and sat a while, just trying to catch my breath. My heart rate had just about gone back to normal when the phone rang. We had a landline. It was still a pretty common thing to find in a house back then. Cell phones were expensive and service was still kinda spotty out where we lived. So the number we had put on the posters was our home phone number. That creep must have helped himself to one. Somehow I just knew it was him before I even picked up the phone. I answered with a sharp, "What?" And sure enough, the tirade of insults began, this time mixed with threats that he was going to find me. I yelled that I was calling the cops and slammed the phone down. He immediately called back, so I disconnected the line and threw the whole handset across the room. All this noise woke up Stephanie. I was crying as I explained to her what happened. She comforted me and grabbed her cell to call her dad Mike, who lived on the other side of town. Despite it being nearly 2 a.m., he answered right away and was over within 30 minutes. We plugged the phone back in, tossed a frozen pizza in the oven, and waited. And it didn't take long before it rang. Mike picked it up without saying a word and let the creep rant for a good 30 seconds. Then he calmly said that he was an officer with our local PD and that the call was being traced and recorded. While I don't condone impersonating law enforcement, this seemed to do the trick. The creep immediately hung up and did not call again. Mike spent the night on our couch just in case he did. Later that morning, we all went down to the station and informed the real police what had happened. We were especially concerned that he would match our landline number with the address listed next to it in the phone book. The cops were kind enough to have our street regularly patrolled for the next month or so. We never did get another call from the creep or see any signs of him. The cops also never found anyone matching his description out driving around. And Spider, the wayward kitty, returned home safe and sound during this time. He came back all on his own, yelling for food outside the door one night. I guess he got hungry after 9 days on the street. We went around the next morning, taking down any remaining posters. While doing this, it occurred to me that if that man had got me into his truck, that I would be the one with my face plastered all over missing posters. In the years since, I've gotten married and have a family of my own now, and I've never again walked outside alone at night. Anyway, Raven, I love your show and I wanted to share this story in hopes that it maybe could save someone from doing as I did. So, thank you. Hi, Raven. First off, I just want to say how much I enjoy your videos. I usually listen to them while working, and it genuinely feels like I have a friend keeping me company in the background. Pleasure's mine, my friend. Anyway, I live in a small city called Dehradun, nestled in the foothills of the Himalayas, in the states of Uttarakhand, India. So, this all started on the 4th of August, 2022. I used to study in a school near the Miawala area, and it's probably the most popular school in that particular area, so they tried all means to not let this information get out of the school, but coming from someone who lived through it, I can assure you it actually happened. So, a little context for the actual event that followed. It was a clear, sunny Thursday in school. Regular classes were going on. Practice for inter-school dance and music competitions were going on in the music and dance rooms of the school, and everything seemed normal to us. But as soon as the bell rang for the end of the school day, news started spreading that some girl in the dance room fainted while practicing, and slowly the news started to get more detailed as people started saying that the girl had a heart attack, and that she was foaming from her mouth, and had gotten rushed to the hospital. This was told to us by people that were present at the scene, so we had no choice but to believe them. Later that day, around 8 p.m. at night, we all got a message from our school confirming the unfortunate news. The girl was one grade senior to us studying in the 12th Commerce, and she had unfortunately passed away. The reason of which was not stated in the notice. It wasn't clear whether she died on the spot or at the hospital, but what we got to know from friends who were present there is that she died on the spot in the school itself. This was the notice. With profound grief and sorrow, we regret to inform the sad demise of our beloved students of, name withdrawn, Academy. The school will remain closed for the next 2 days. The school will reopen on Monday, 8/8/2022. Regards, the principal. Our school gave us 2 days of leave and did a few minutes of silence to mourn for our loss. The news came out that the chairman called priest and did puja, a religious practice, in school, and the priest was our friend's father. In the academic session of 2022 to 2023, the dance class was in the basement. But for the next academic session, they shifted the class to the new building along with the art room and music class. Everything was going normal for a few months, but then one day something strange happened. So, it was early in the morning, an assembly was going on, and our accountancy teacher, who must not be named since he really didn't want to be associated with this incident, he used to get mad at anybody who asked him about this. He wasn't usually a strict teacher, in fact he was very funny and sarcastic, in his late 20s, but for some reason, whenever we asked him about this incident, he used to get all serious. Anyway, he was standing at the back of the line and started to feel a bit sick. So, he went back to his class, which was 11th Commerce B. One thing you should know is that 11th Commerce B was shifted down to the basement, where the dance class used to be. As our teacher approached his class, he took a glance around the classroom, which was empty because assembly was going on, and he sat on the chair and put his head down. Now, as the assembly usually goes on, the office staff who sit on the CCTV monitor usually checks if there are any students sitting in the class, because that wasn't allowed in any case, unless asked for permission, such as if a student got sick during or before the assembly, they used to go to the sick room. So like any other day, and that day too, ma'am was checking the CCTV camera until something in particular caught her attention. She quickly double-checked it and rushed to the class in the basement. As she entered the class, she saw that our accountancy teacher was sitting there with his head on the table. She got a bit confused at first, so she decided to ask our teacher about it. She said, "Sir, where is that girl who was sitting with you just now?" Sir got a bit confused. He said, "What are you talking about, ma'am? It was just me the whole time. Nobody entered or left the classroom." But ma'am was sure about what she saw, and so was Sir. Both of them thought that the other one was messing with them, but what happened next baffled them both. After a few minutes of discussion, ma'am finally said that if he doesn't believe her, he could check the CCTV footage. Both of them went to the office to check it, and sure enough, ma'am was right. There was a girl sitting in the front bench right in front of our teacher, who appeared to be old enough to be in class 12. She was wearing our uniform, but not the right one, since we all were wearing our house uniform that day, but she was wearing the main uniform. White kurta with blue polka dots and a blue salwar. But they couldn't really tell who she was because the cameras are in the back of the class, so faces are not really visible. Not only that, she was sitting so still, just not moving a muscle and looking right at our teacher. This creeped both of them out. The news spread like a wildfire. Every teacher was talking about it for a day, but from the next day, nobody uttered a word about it. I suppose management found out, and to protect the goodwill of our school, they had shut everyone up. But that was not the only thing that happened. The school decided to forbid entry into that particular region of the basement and shifted those classes on upper floors, giving it the name of maintenance. Even though everything was fine in those classes, and there was no maintenance work going on there at all. We could see because the library is right next to it. It stayed closed for a few months until they opened it up again, but now instead of 11th Commerce B, they made another art room there for juniors. And no maintenance work was ever done until that time either. We tried to ask our teachers about it, but they would just shut us up. It's been 1.5 years since that incident, and we still don't know who that girl actually was in the footage, or what they saw on the CCTV when ma'am entered the class. Did she disappear? Was she still visible on the camera? I guess we'll never know. Hi, Raven. I love your channel. I'm not a native English speaker or writer, so please bear with me if there are any typos in my text. I apologize in advance for misspelling, but I really want to share my story with you. Or more so, it's not my story, it's a story about my wife. Me and my wife are both sort of spiritual. Not religious much, but spiritual. I'm okay with your typos as long as you're okay with me butchering the German in this story. I tried to do pronounce on Google, but it wasn't working, so I have to do my best. My wife had a situation that she cannot explain all her life, and it's mind-boggling what she has experienced over the years. As a teenager, she performed Glasrücken, which is shoving jars, as it is very popular among young people in Germany. Glasrücken is quite similar to the use of a Ouija board that you most likely know in the US. It's pretty much the same. You place small notes with each letter in the alphabet on a table, as well as each number from 0 to 9, and the words Ja for yes, Nein for no, and Auf Wiedersehen for goodbye on the table. The major difference between the American and English version and the German one is that you put a small jar upside down on the table, with everyone just putting their index finger on top of it, so that the spirits, or whatever, can move the jar to each letter and number. Anyway, now that I've explained the thing, I hope you get the idea. Here is what she experienced performing it. As I told you, she performed it as a teenager, so the questions that they asked moved more towards the issues that young adults are dealing with. On one occasion, they were performing it in one of her friend's bedroom. Now, just picture the usual teenager bedroom, like they are in the US, with a lot of mess lying around, a lot of posters hanging on the wall, and a small pack of girls kneeling on the floor, performing Glasrücken. As it progressed, the usual questions arose, like, who's in love with me? Who will I be in love with? Who's holding a grudge against me, and so on. Then, one of her female friends asked one question that differed from all the other questions, because it was addressed to the ghost directly. And she asked, "Where are you?" It's a simple question, so you might suspect a simple answer, right? Well, the glass moved and it spelled the words BEHIND, behind, THE, the, EMINEM, Eminem, POSTER, poster. Now you've got to understand that Eminem is a popular artist in Germany as well, so he's well known here too, but what left them speechless is what happened right afterwards. Right after the ghost finished talking, the girls turned their heads to the only Eminem poster in the room, and right as they did, one of the needles holding the poster on the wall fell off of the wall. A corner of the poster now leaned toward the girls, exposing the blank wall behind it. The girls, obviously, were in awe. Astronomical coincidence, you might say. Well, then let me tell you another one. On another occasion, they were performing it on a warm summer night outside their town hall, that is a bit outside of the town that she lives in. Now, you've got to keep in mind they didn't do this in complete darkness, which will be important later. There were street lights, and lights coming from the town hall all around them. She and her girlfriends were sitting there performing Glasrücken, again, and it was the usual teenager stuff asked by the teenagers, until one of them met the ominous mistake of addressing the ghost directly again. She asked, "What is your name?" And the jar responded. It just spelled Satan, Satan. And as soon as it reached the letter N, there was a sudden bang, and all the lights around them just went off. Not just the streetlights above them, but also the lights coming from the town hall, and it was pitch black in the entire town. A full blackout that affected the area. The girls were terrified and left the place screaming in fear. They ran towards the center of the town when they saw that there was just one house not affected by the blackout. It was the house of my wife's parents. Her spiritual mother always warned them about performing Glasrücken, as she saw it as a tool of raising demons. The girls all went into the house and told my future mother-in-law what had happened, to which she replied with something like, "I told you so." On the third occasion they were performing it, in one of the girls' bedrooms, where they were trying to get to the bottom of things, they were trying to find out what actually moved the jar. So, they started Glasrücken again, But this time, one of the girls had to lift their index finger every few seconds so that it was clear that none of the girls had moved the jar intentionally. As every time it was the usual questions about school or boys or something like that, with the exception that none of the girls were holding their index finger on the jar permanently. And what was striking is what then happened. From one second to another, the jar just rushed to the wall, striking it to 1,000 bits, as if it was thrown by force. It almost exploded on the wall. Needless to say, the girls were shocked and devastated. How can you ever explain or forget something like that? Now, my wife hasn't performed Gläserrücken afterwards as it was too intense for her. I know that this sounds like a made-up story, but I've honestly no doubt to believe her. She would swear on her life that this is all true. She wouldn't want to perform it nowadays because she believed that her naive, childish-like approach protected her somehow. We in Germany have a popular saying of Welpenschutz, which is puppy protection, that relates to someone's experience. It's basically saying that if you're young, clumsy, and unexperienced, you are going to have to be guided and protected by an organization or other people or the universe itself until you can stand on your own 2 feet. So she's basically saying the universe somehow guided or protected her so that these experiences didn't cause any actual harm to her. Hey Raven, here's a ghost story for you. I live in Brisbane, a city of about 3 million people. Not as famous as Sydney or Melbourne, but still a pretty big place. One night, after a rough breakup, I was wandering around a place called Kangaroo Point, close to Brisbane's main CBD, trying to just clear my head. My eyes were still puffy from crying, and I just needed some space. At first, I thought I was seeing 2 guys fighting, and got kind of freaked out because I was all alone and one of them had a huge knife stabbing the other guy. But then I noticed that they were both kind of see-through and wearing clothes from the old days. And that's when it hit me. I was witnessing something totally paranormal. This guy was getting disassembled in a not-so-graphic way, to put it, right in front of me. The next day I told my friend about it and she said, "That sounds like the main story. You know, the guy who supposedly killed Robert Cox, because that's where it happened, and whose family donated a bunch of money to the University of Queensland out of all that guilt and shame that Patrick had brought to their family. I'm pretty sure all the buildings are named after them." My friend and I even ended up checking out his grave on one of those grave tours they do in Toowong Cemetery near Mount Cootha. It was super fancy and huge. I heard that this guy got hung for the murder, who didn't even do it, and only on his deathbed did Patrick Maine confess to killing him. There's even this old building in Brisbane near the famous Pancake Manor, which I think used to be a newspaper office, that has devils all over it, adding to the eerie vibe of the city's hidden history. Why devils, I wonder? Maybe because most news that's told is fake and corrupt, just like back then in the 1800s. Ever since that night, I can't help but feel a chill whenever I pass Kangaroo Point. It's like the city's history isn't just in the past. It's right there, underneath the surface, waiting for someone to notice it. Hello, Raven. I want to take a minute to thank you for all that you do. You're my favorite YouTuber, and I listen to your podcast all day at work, and helps me get through my days. I work in an animal shelter, so it can be hard, but your stories make things easier, so, again, thank you. Thank you for the work that you do, and it's an absolute honor to help you through your days. Anyway, the situation took place about 6 years ago. I'm a woman, and at the time of the story, I was 17, and had just moved into my own apartment due to my parents not being the best people to live with, and having graduated high school at the age of 16. I worked at a local Mexican food chain, and was just trying to get my life together before going into community college the next year. It was winter break, and my best friend and I wanted to throw a party. A last hurrah of sorts before I was going off to college in the spring term. I lived in a 4-bedroom apartment with one roommate. It was a student housing, so I was paired with a random guy who I did not get along with. But that's an entirely different story. My best friend and I, let's call her Lauren, began inviting anyone and everyone we could think of. I posted on Facebook asking who all wanted to come, and had a couple of friends respond, and one random guy who I had gone to high school with but hadn't actually had a direct conversation with in person up to this point. His name was Sam. He sent me a message asking for details, and I thought this guy was okay, a little weird, but a nice enough guy. Maybe he could be a good addition to the party, and, well, at this rate, I valued quantity over quality in terms of guests. I sent him the details, and Lauren and I began preparing for the party, ordering pizza, buying snacks and drinks, and making sure the apartment was ready for our shenanigans. The evening of the party arrived, and guests began pouring in. We laughed, played games, ate some junk food, and drank. Sam arrived and brought a case of beer. Nice and thoughtful, I thought, hoping that he would have fun at the party despite not knowing anyone here. He joined in our game of Cards Against Humanity, and it was pretty fun. Though he'd laugh a little too hard at the dark humor and disturbing jokes, but honestly that made me feel more comfortable with him, thinking that he would fit in well with myself and my weird friends. As the night goes on, people start to leave until it's just me, Lauren, our friend Adam, and then Sam. We decide to head out to the apartment complex's hot tub. I wear a t-shirt and leggings as I was insecure about my body at this time and didn't actually own a swimsuit. The boys stripped down to their underwear, and Lauren had actually brought a swimsuit just in case, so she changed into that. While we all soaked and chatted, I noticed that Sam was staring intensely at Lauren's bikini top. She didn't seem to notice, but I tried to loop Sam into the conversation so that maybe he would stop staring, and part of me hoped that he was just staring into space and didn't notice that he was being a creep. At one point, we all began playing Truth or Dare. Sam dared me to take off more clothes, and reluctantly I did take off my top, revealing a sports bra. Still not terribly out of my comfort zone, until Sam's eyes flew down to stare at my chest. "Come on, man, don't be weird," I said, giggling and trying to keep the vibes positive, while hoping he would catch on that he was making me uncomfortable. He responded with, "Nah, this is the whole reason I came tonight." I didn't know how to respond to that, and just went back to the game, daring Sam to lay on the frozen ground next to the hot tub. He got out of the hot tub and did so, steam rolling off of his body as he laid down, but glancing down, we could all see that he was, well, excited. All of us uttered groans of gross and ew when we noticed, and he just laughed and said, "You're all just jealous you can't have this," which resulted in more groans from the three of us. He got back into the tub, and we chatted and played more Truth or Dare until we'd had enough of the hot tub, and all ran back to my apartment, our warm bodies chilling rapidly in the winter air. I got into the apartment and let my friends back in, as they all ran behind me. I went to grab some clean and dry clothes and change while Lauren used my roommate's bathroom to change. I locked the bathroom door behind me as I started peeling the wet clothes off and drying my cold body. All of a sudden, I hear the doorknob rattle. I had it locked behind me. I'm still in here," I said, annoyed and confused as they all knew I went in here to change. "Oh, I know," Sam replied in an excited voice. I'm freaking out at this point, and I start trying to pull on my clothes, but putting leggings on while having wet skin is much more difficult than one would think. I hear him playing with the doorknob while I'm still struggling to throw on my clothes. "What are you doing, man?" I shout, but he doesn't answer. I yell out for Adam. "Adam, help me out, bro." But then he responds with, "Hey, this is between you two." What the hell? I thought Adam was a good friend, but now I'm angry and just thinking he's a coward. I hear Lauren coming out of the other bathroom, and she begins to yell at him, when Sam actually manages to pick the lock. The bathroom doors at this apartment were extremely cheap and easy to pick, so it wasn't that surprising, but I was still surprised. And angry. I threw my half-naked body against the door, trying to keep him out while still pulling the rest of my clothes on. I managed to get the door shut again and locked while I managed to get the clothes the rest of the way on, before he picks the lock again. The door opens, and I shove past him. I ask him what the hell he was doing, and he responds with, "I'm just kidding, I got you so good." I don't respond, but angrily sit on the couch, and Lauren sits next to me. The awkward vibes hang in the air before I break the silence by suggesting that we all play a game. Not knowing how to get past the awkwardness, and mentally gaslighting myself thinking Sam was just joking and that I was overreacting. But also being scared that if I asked him to leave, it might ruin the night. We all settle down and do another round of Cards Against Humanity before Sam stands up and goes into my bedroom without saying anything. We all look around to each other, confused, and ask what he's doing. We get up and follow him in, and see that under my blankets, he's moving his hand up and down in his crotch area. We all exclaim and get grossed out before leaving and shutting the door. We all fall asleep in the living room after hanging out a bit longer. In the morning, we awake to Adam cooking eggs and realize that Sam was already gone. I ask them what the hell that was all about, and we laugh about it while I throw my bedding in the washer. Sam sends me a text later that week saying that the party was fun, and that he's sorry things got out of hand. So I think that's all over. Until a week later, and he shows up in my workplace to eat tacos and watch me work. I don't even know how he knew where I worked, as the restaurant has about 10 locations in that city, and I only worked at that one occasionally. After that, I blocked him, and he moved out of state shortly after. He did make a new Facebook account and then sent me shirtless pictures of himself a couple of years later, but I blocked him again. He tried to date another friend of mine at one point, and when I told her about the whole bathroom incident, she confronted him and he denied it, saying that I had come on to him and that he rejected me. Anyways, that's the whole story. Not terribly scary, but definitely disturbing. For those listening, know that it's okay to stand up for yourself, and if you think someone is acting weird, listen to your instincts. Back in my 20s, my girlfriend Stacy and I lived in a decent little apartment complex where most people were pretty chill. At the point where this story takes place, we had lived there about 6 years, and we knew most of our neighbors, and most of them quite well. Like, shared keys to feed the pets and water the plants, kind of knew them. We all got along, talked a lot in passing, and probably knew enough about each other that they could be family. But then, one year, this woman moved into the same building we lived in, 2 doors down from us. I'll call her Denise. Right off the bat, Denise was different, and not necessarily in a bad way. Or at least not at first. She was probably in her mid-40s, lived alone, no pets, no visitors that we ever saw. I saw her carrying in boxes on her own, but never saw her with any help. I was expecting to see a truck one day so I could offer to help, but either it never happened, or she managed to have them over when we weren't home. Most people in our building at least say hi in passing, but Denise actively avoided eye contact. She would literally turn around and go the other direction if she saw people coming. If we both walked out at the same time, she would go back in until I was gone. At first, Stacy and I just figured that she was shy, or maybe she was going through something tough. Alas, live and let live. But then the complaints started. About a month after Denise moved in, Stacy and I got called into the building's management office. They said they received a noise complaint about our apartment, and they asked us to keep the quiet hours in mind. We've lived there long enough that I don't think they felt like we were out here being troublemakers. We did have a game night, and had a few friends over, so I just assumed that maybe we got a touch too excited, so I accepted it. We apologized, made a mental note to bring it down a notch, and we were on our way. 2 weeks later, there was another complaint. This time, there was a letter attached to our door from the office saying the cooking smells coming from our place were disturbing other residents, and to make sure that we open windows, use stove vents, etc., and to try to avoid strong scents. I was confused because the day before we got the letter, I had made a simple curry. It's something I probably make once a week and had never gotten complaints before. I also always use the exhaust fan and the ceiling fan because otherwise it would get too hot in there anyways. We just, again, accepted it and moved on. Then, one day on my way home from work, one of our neighbors, Mike and Kelly, said that they got a noise complaint too. The problem with this is that Mike works nights, so he's not home. Kelly works during the day from home, but they're the quietest people ever. They never have people over, and you typically have to initiate conversation with them. That's why he asked about it. He asked if we had heard anything and apologized to us. We certainly didn't hear anything from their apartment and had never had issues with them before either. But as the days continued, more and more of us long-term residents were getting complaints about the silliest things. Noise, smells. Someone got a note because she left her porch light on after 8 p.m. She keeps it on because, again, her partner gets home from work late. And someone else got one for having a trash bag on her patio. Her private patio that only the residents can get to. The thing is, it wasn't even trash. She had a bag covering a plant that she had just moved out there. We were all getting frustrated and wondering if maybe the office was trying to weed out all of us long-term tenants in hopes to charge more to the new people. But the office people just didn't seem like the type to do that. Then, we all started piecing the timeline together and realized the complaints didn't start until after Denise moved in. The complaints were all petty enough for someone like that to do, just to cause problems. And of course, the office wouldn't say who they were coming from. But it became pretty clear when all the complaints were for people in the same building as ourselves and Denise. I wanted to say something to her, or maybe even the office, because it wasn't right. But instead of getting mean, Stacy had a better idea. The complex held a little Independence Day celebration every year for our little community. It was nice because they would block off part of the back parking lot, which gave the kids a safe place to shoot fireworks. They also have a cookout and ask anyone who attends to bring something, whether it's meat, sides, desserts, drinks, just anything to make it easier. And Stacy and I are very outgoing people, so when we found out they did this, we attended every year and helped wherever we could. We also brought our grill down and helped with the cooking, and even contributed to the fireworks for anyone to use. But when 2020 showed its ugly head, they of course canceled it for that year and 2021. We asked about it for 22, and they said that they weren't going to host it indefinitely, so we decided to have a smaller version of it and kept it to the folks in our little complex. We had all gotten to know each other pretty well, and after talking to them, they also agreed that it was a good idea. And Stacy said that she would go and invite Denise in the hopes that we could all get to know her, and maybe she would loosen up a bit. I was certainly reluctant and was expecting Denise to slam the door in Stacy's face, or just maybe not answer at all, but to my surprise, she answered. She was polite, if not shy and quiet, and accepted her offer. So, I thought at that point, maybe this would all actually work. Fast forward to the day of our cookout, we were all out back, and Mike and I had started grilling. Everyone brought out chairs for us to have a place to sit, and we started enjoying each other's company. It's something we haven't really been able to do to this extent. About an hour into the cookout, Denise walked around back carrying a box. I ran to help her, and with a smile on her face, she explained that she made her famous 3-bean chili and her family's cheesecake. I was impressed. She was smiling, talking about what all she used in her chili, and even joked about her secret ingredient that made it her own. We set them out on the table with the rest of the spread and got her a chair. Like I said, color me surprised by how social she had become. She was chatting with everyone, making jokes, and even asking others about the food they brought. I could tell that a lot of us were relieved, but I did notice how she was pushy about people trying the stuff she made. She kept talking about how the cheesecake recipe was very special, because it had been a part of her family for decades. Unfortunately, I had been eating a lot before she showed up. Stacy and Kelly both made some killer finger foods, as they normally do, and I had a few brats on top of that. I never did try the chili, but I told her I would pack a small container for myself to have later, and while she seemed a little disappointed, she accepted this. I'm also not a big dairy person, and cheesecake especially. I don't like the textures of most of them, so I only took a small bite of what Stacy cut for herself. It tasted pretty good, but still wasn't my thing. Nothing against the cheesecake at all. But everyone else that had both seemed to really enjoy it, and by the end, we were all in a food coma. That is, we assumed it was a food coma. Kelly said that she was going to head home early because she wasn't feeling well, and she just assumed she overate. No big deal. Then Mike said that he was feeling the same, so he left. The conversation slowly dwindled as we all noticed the look in everyone's faces. Steven told us that he probably shouldn't have had so much cheesecake since he was out in the sun, and after trying to help clean up some, he had to run to the side of the complex because he got sick. I offered to help him back to his place, and he accepted because I honestly don't think he would have made it on his own. He looked pale and was having trouble standing. And that's when I started feeling a bit weird. Mentally, that is. There were 3 people now that were not feeling well after our little party. Was something bad? Was it food poisoning? Does that even hit that fast? I was physically feeling fine, and when I looked back at the group, I saw several other people looking a bit out of it, including Stacy. She said that she was just going to take something and would come back to help clean up. By the time I walked back to the lot after dropping Steven off, most of the people were gone. Denise was still in her seat with a glass of tea staring up at the sky. I asked her where everyone went, and she said that some left saying they were tired and some said they weren't feeling well. This convinced me that something must have happened to the food. We all ate the same stuff, and most of us were feeling sick now. So what was bad? Or was the meat not cooked properly? I was freaking out. I thanked Denise for coming, but started picking up, which included me stacking all the food in a box, not caring if it was stored or not, as I was going to throw it all out. I didn't know what it could be, and there was no way for me to figure it out. Denise thanked me for inviting her, and left with her container of chili and cheesecake. Not much left of either, and then I asked her how she was feeling. I remember her shrugging, her smile fell a little as she said she felt fine, just a bit warm from the heat. So why didn't she seem to feel ill? Then I realized I wasn't feeling ill. So if it was the food, what was there that neither myself nor Denise ate? I started thinking more on this and realized the only thing I didn't really have was the cheese ball that Jessica brought and Denise's chili and cheesecake. But Denise, from what I remember, had a little bit of everything, except her own. I remember her not eating her own food and someone had asked about it. Her explanation was that she was lactose intolerant, so while she loved cheesecake, it didn't love her. And she said that she was snacking and having the chili as she made it, so she wasn't too hungry. But as I said, she was still eating everyone else's stuff. This immediately got me thinking, and you know where I'm going with this, I would hope. But I didn't even know how I could go about proving that Denise could have put something in her own food. Most of it was consumed, and she had taken the containers back with her. I checked in with everyone that was there and learned just how ill they had all gotten, including Stacy. Some were throwing up, some were in severe stomach pain. Some, including Stacy, practically slept in the bathroom. I ended up taking her to urgent care, fearing that she was dehydrated. We told the doctor how it came to this, at least what we knew, and they were honest and said that her symptoms specifically definitely seemed like a bad reaction to something. We went in claiming possible food poisoning, but the doctor felt it was something more than that, which is when we explained the party. Unfortunately, this was 2 days later, so the party was long over and Denise probably long discarded the leftovers. The illness lasted about the same time for everyone else that we checked on too. I couldn't help it, and I asked them about the foods too, and a few of them agreed with me that something wasn't right. Everyone was eating prior and we all felt fine, until Denise showed up with her share. But would this woman really try to drug or even poison us? We all treated her like one of our own, welcoming her to our party and conversation, but she'd been calling in complaints on us. Or most likely. Again, I guess I can't confirm that. It's just awfully convenient that she moved in, the complaints started, and we would all end up sick as hell when she showed up. I'd like to say that we have some kind of resolution, but we never did. We couldn't prove anything, so nothing could be done. Not like we could call the police and say, hey, we think our neighbor poisoned us a few days ago. All we could do was go back to how we were. Those of us that knew each other stuck together, and we all did our best to avoid Denise. There were a few more complaints that were made, but after going to the office about it, they said neither the person complaining nor them could prove the claims, so they never took action. In less than a year, however, Denise moved out. One day, the office manager was standing in the doorway complaining to someone in the apartment, and we learned that she had left abruptly. She told the office that she was moving out. They asked her for timelines since she would be breaking the lease, and she never responded. They went to talk to her and found the place trashed with very little taken. Her clothes and some other belongings were taken, but she left everything else, making it their problem. I guess, surely, the office manager was pissed off enough about it that she let it slip out that Denise was the one complaining. So, she moved in, complained about all of us, tried to potentially poison us, and then left? None of us, including the office, understands why she did this. And I don't think we will ever have answers. But all I know is that I hope she found some happiness somewhere. But for me personally, let's never meet again. Hi, Raven. Thank you for the opportunity to share my story here. I haven't had many weird experiences throughout my life, but this is definitely one that I still don't have a logical explanation for. Before my firstborn, I had 2 miscarriages. My husband and I very much wanted children, so those experiences were not only hard for me physically, but were emotionally heartbreaking. During the 3rd pregnancy, the one that ended successfully with our first child, there were a few things that happened that were weird. We had one of those docks that was popular about 10 years ago that included a radio and a connection where you could both charge an iPod and also listen to the music on the iPod through the radio speaker. That device was sitting on the dresser in our room, right in front of the bed, and the TV sat there too. We were watching TV one night, and all of a sudden we started hearing music. It took us a minute to realize that the radio/iPod dock had started playing music. We looked at each other puzzled, but didn't make a big deal out of it. Electronics can do weird things, right? My husband got up, as we didn't have the little remote on hand, and turned it off. As we continued watching our show, about 30 minutes later, the same thing happened. We were a little spooked by this time, but we were both engineers and rather scientifically minded, so we kind of just brushed it off again. Another day, I was home alone, resting on our bed, and had left that device in the bathroom as I liked to listen to the radio while I showered back then. If you're guessing that I started hearing music again, you would be right. I don't remember details about the station or the type of music, and I wish I did, because I don't recall having identified any patterns, and I wish I had thought about that. The thing is, I guess both of us just wanted to ignore the whole thing and hope it would stop. Here's where things get weirder. In our country, big earthquakes are very common. I actually like them. About 4 years prior to the pregnancy from this story, we had a very big one. 8.8 on the Richter scale, if you know what that means. Because it was so big, my father had gifted me a flashlight that included an analog radio tuner for emergencies. It was battery operated and very basic, and to turn it on, you had to slide a toggle. I used to keep this flashlight in the kitchen on top of the fridge, and we never used either the flashlight nor the radio. As I said, it was one of those things that you would only use in an emergency. One day we were eating lunch in the dining room, and all of a sudden loud music starts playing in the apartment. We immediately thought it was the radio/iPod dock that had been acting out the previous times, so my husband got up and went to our bedroom to check it. But it wasn't that. It took us a few minutes to track it down, and sure enough, it was the emergency flashlight's radio that was playing. I have no explanation, as opposed to the radio/iPod dock, which was digital. With this one, you had to slide that toggle to turn it on, and it was on top of the fridge. Anyway, we stopped having radios spontaneously playing music after our son was born. I like to think it was a way that he was trying to reassure us that he was okay, and it was a healthy pregnancy. There were other weird things that happened during that pregnancy that were not radio-related, but I'm not certain that they belong in this same story. Hello again, Raven. I enjoy listening to your podcast and hearing people's experiences in the strange world we live in. It makes me feel like I'm not going crazy when weird stuff happens to me. About 6 months ago, one such weird thing happened. I have a sunroom in the back of my house with 3 recessed skylights and a door that opens to the backyard. It was a beautiful day in late fall, so I let my cat out into the yard and left the door open a crack so we could come in when he was ready. My house isn't completely level, so I knew the door would close itself to its slightly ajar state after the cat came in. I did this every day and had never had a problem. After the cat had come in for the morning, I closed the door completely and did some things in another part of the house. A couple hours later, I went back into the sunroom, and up in all 3 skylights were flies. Not just a few, but dozens of them. I hadn't seen any flies when I was out there earlier that morning when I went to close the door. Nevertheless, I got the fly swatter and proceeded to swat flies. And some of them were too high up to reach, so I got out the vacuum cleaner and went to work on them with that. I finally got them all, about 30 flies in total. I got a ladder and climbed up to inspect each skylight to see if one of them had been breached in some way, but everything seemed to be intact. So I figured that was the end of the fly invasion. The next morning, I went out into the sunroom, and the flies were back. Not the same flies, obviously, but flies nonetheless. They weren't quite so many this time, but I counted somewhere around 20 flies that I killed that day. I got out the ladder again and felt around each skylight rim to see if there were any more flies, hoping to flush out any that might be hiding up there, but didn't find any more. The next morning, I went out into the sunroom, and you guessed it, there were more flies. There were fewer this time, only about 10, which I took care of by the usual methods. I'm happy to report that this was the end of the fly invasion, all totaled. I estimated that there were somewhere around 60 flies that I killed. I have no idea where all these flies came from, or how and why they kept reappearing. I didn't notice any flies in any other parts of the house. It wasn't fly season either, late November or early December. There was nothing in the sunroom to attract them. No food, and certainly no dead bodies or manure piles. What did they even want there? Thankfully, nothing like that has happened since. I class this as paranormal because I didn't know what else to call it, other than just plain weird. Greetings, Raven. This is my story from the 1970s, where seances and the Ouija board were a great form of entertainment, neither of which I would now touch with a 10-foot pole. As teenagers, one of the many things my group of friends did at sleepovers was the game of light as a feather, stiff as a board. With the lights off and the candles burning, the victim would lay on the floor with their head at the narrator's lap, and the rest of us on either side of the body. Each of the lifters would place 2 fingers on each hand under the corpse. The narrator would tell an account of the victim's death, usually by supernatural causes. The story would always finish with the sentence, "We will now lift, insert name, to her final resting place." All of us would begin to chant, "Light as a feather, stiff as a board," as we raised up the body. This met with mild success until someone started giggling, and then we would all crack up. One night, Carrie, by far the best narrator of all, told an elaborate tale of Mandy's demise. I don't remember all of the story, but it had to do with being trapped and underground with demons. This was unlike anything Carrie had ever told. It was dark and terrifyingly real. I was feeling lightheaded and sick to my stomach. My skin began to crawl and the room felt iced cold. In hushed tones, we chanted, "Light as a feather, stiff as a board, light as a feather, stiff as a board." The candles began to flicker wildly as we continued to lift her. With my heart beating in my ears, I realized that Mandy's body was levitating. No one was holding her up. She was just floating. Then someone screamed and Mandy fell hard. We all started crying, and Mandy's dad came out and told us all to quiet down and to go to bed. No one slept. We just huddled together and waited for the sun to rise. As an adult, I know this has to be the imagination of an impressionable teen, but all of us to this day remember the experience exactly the same way. I still wake up sometimes in cold sweats after dreaming of that night so many years ago. So, the story took place in 1998, when I was 13 and in 8th grade at Clever High School, in the town of Clever, Missouri. It was a crappy little town with 1 stoplight, 1 grocery store, and a feed mill. From what I hear, it's still a crappy town, but only a bit bigger these days. The school was so small that they had elementary, that's K through 5, and then high school, 6 through 12. I guess I'll go ahead and preamble this by saying that the story took place on Halloween, and by this point, I had a bit of a reputation at this school, because I was the big city boy, the goth kid with long hair and dark clothes, and with this being a country school, I kind of had to stand up for myself a lot. So, this particular day, as I said, was Halloween, and the school had given people permission to wear their costumes, sans full face masks, to school. Well, I went dressed like the Crow. And as I was walking up to the school, this older kid, a junior or senior, I don't remember, walks up and just starts laying into me with very charged language. Things I will not dignify by repeating them here. And, being who I am, I wasn't having it. I went right back at him and things got really heated, and a fight nearly broke out right there in front of the school before the doors had even been unlocked to let people in. Well, it didn't get to that point, so I went on about my day. Then, around lunchtime, out of nowhere, every cop in town, well, 3 of them, Plus, some county sheriffs were crawling all over the school. Turns out, that kid had a gun in his locker, alongside some drugs. And the rumor had been that he was going to be waiting for me after school. That was my last day going to a public school. I was homeschooled until I was 16 when I got my GED, so that was my near miss at school. Funny world, isn't it? Hello, Raven. I've been listening to and greatly enjoying your channel for a few years, but this is the first strange experience I've submitted, here or anywhere else. I apologize in advance for how long this turned out to be. I tried to keep it as short as possible. I don't know whether to call it paranormal or a glitch in the Matrix, so I'll let you decide. Anyway, this event happened in 1993 when I was 14 years old, but first, context. I've always been kind of an outcast, even in my own family. Don't get me wrong, I love my family and know that they love me, but I had a rough childhood. I won't go into the details of my trauma, only that it started when I was 5 and involved a close family member, so I often would avoid going home whenever possible. The trauma also negatively affected how I relate to people. I was shy, withdrawn, and often anxious as a child, which made me often feel sick to my stomach, and I was the frequent target of teasing at school. Put simply, I was unpopular. I have siblings, but they're all older, and they were unaware at the time of the trauma that was happening. To them, I was just a clingy, annoying little sister, always wanting to do what they did and to go where they went. They had no idea that I was behaving that way so I wouldn't be left home alone with the person I desperately wanted to avoid. I did have 2 best friends back then. This would have been from 85 to 1990. I'll call them Kay and Nancy. We all lived on the same street, and I spent as much time as possible at either of their houses. I would ask to sleep over every weekend and even more in the summer. As I was mostly well-behaved and polite, their parents didn't seem to mind having me around all the time, thankfully. Due to my constant anxiety, there were several times when one or both friends wouldn't want to spend time with me, though. I guess someone as needy and clingy as I was back then would have probably gotten tiring, even for little kids. I should also give some background about the neighborhood I grew up in. A typical lower-middle-class suburb in southeast Michigan. It was mostly a quiet, boring couple of blocks where all the houses were built around the same time and looked very similar except for one, the oldest and only 2-story farmhouse, located around the corner from my house and situated directly in the center of the block. The farmhouse had a big covered porch and a giant backyard, and it would have stood out amongst the single-story brick ranch homes that surrounded it, even without the ominous feeling that it gave me. The first owners, that I knew of, were an elderly man and his adult son. I only saw the son when he was walking to or from his van to go grocery shopping. I would occasionally see the old man looking out the living room windows, or very rarely on the porch in a wheelchair. He didn't smile or wave like some other old folks in the neighborhood, he would just sit and stare. He seemed sad and angry, and I thought he was kind of creepy. No matter if I was alone or with other kids, if I got near that house, I would get an eerie feeling. And though I knew it was rude to stare and I would feel scared, I wouldn't be able to keep my eyes off the house until I got far enough away. Like the house itself would somehow get me. The old man eventually passed away and his son moved out of the house a few months later. I'm not sure if he sold the house or maybe he was forced to leave, but it sat empty for what seemed like a really long time. Anyway, in the summer of 1990, a new family finally moved into the farmhouse, and they had a daughter my age that I'll call Jane. She was tall, slender, with blonde hair, blue eyes, and a sweet personality. The total opposite of me, who was brooding, short, and chubby with boring brown hair. She was instantly popular. After her family moved in, I would see her playing with the other kids, but I avoided her. Mostly because I was shy and kind of frightened of her because of the house that she lived in, but I'll also admit that I was jealous that Kay and Nancy were now spending all their time with the new and interesting Jane. One afternoon, they were all riding bikes together, while I pedaled around by myself at the opposite end of the block, jealous but unwilling to invite myself over to play with them. To my surprise, Jane biked over to me on her own and said hi. It's funny. I don't know or remember exactly what was said during that introduction, but we instantly clicked and became true best friends. We were basically inseparable from that point through high school. A lot of paranormal things that happened to me during my youth were when I was with Jane inside of her creepy house, or the surrounding yard. There are several stories I can tell you, but I will start with what I consider to be the most bizarre. It was a weekend in September, or early October of 1993, and I was spending the night at Jane's, which I had done many, many times before. This night, however, was different, because Jane's older brother had just gone off to college, so she got to move into his bedroom in the basement. Jane and I were both really into the paranormal, and would spend a lot of our time trying different things. I got pretty good at reading tarot cards, we both collected crystals, and we would read or watch anything to do with aliens, witches, cryptids, or basically anything supernatural. The only thing we didn't try was a Ouija board, but that was because I was too afraid of them, and I still have never touched one. That particular night, we were experimenting with playing records in reverse to listen for hidden messages. Jane's brother had left a bunch of them behind when he went to college, plus we had a decent amount of our own records that we'd found at vintage stores or yard sales. Jane was a huge Beatles fan, and had all of their albums, while I had a lot of 70s rock like Led Zeppelin and Pink Floyd. Along with her brother's records, we had quite a selection to play with. We were in the basement bedroom, with the lights off except for a few candles, and had lit some incense while we played several different records in reverse. I guess I should state that we were both completely sober. Other than sneaking an occasional cigarette from a parent, we never drank or did any drugs of any kind, so I know for certain that what happened wasn't the result of an intoxicating or hallucinogenic substance. Anyway, I was feeling thoroughly creeped out after listening to Stairway to Heaven backwards, so Jane suggested a switch to a Beatles album. Being such a big fan, and both of us being into creepy stuff in general, we knew about the Paul is dead theory, and were trying to find the supposed hidden message about it in the lyrics. We spent a lot of time messing with the Sgt. Pepper album first, and did hear some creepy things. Once we exhausted that record, we switched to the White Album, and eventually the song Revolution No. 9. If you've never heard that song, it can be unnerving played the normal way. Playing it backwards, though, I think it was the creepiest song we played that night. We played it several times, both forwards and backwards, listening intently for hidden lines or messages. As it grew later and I became increasingly more jumpy from our research, I was less willing to sit on the floor by the record player, taking my turn to spin the table to play the creepy song backwards. I eventually moved to sitting on Jane's bed, flipping through a book on the paranormal I had checked out from the library, while Jane sat on the floor with her back against the bed and a crate of records on the floor between her legs, looking for the next album she wanted to try. Revolution No. 9 was still playing on repeat as she flipped through the albums. It was on its second or third playthrough, since I'd gotten on the bed when I heard Jane gasp. I looked up from my book to see her staring at the doorway, frozen in the motion of pulling a new album from its sleeve. The bedroom had a bead curtain in place of an actual door, and the room was situated in a corner of the basement so that you could see most of the basement through the open doorway. The only area that was completely hidden from view was a small utility area where the washer and dryer and water heater were concealed by a wall. I asked Jane what was wrong, but she didn't answer, just stared in the direction of the doorway, unmoving for what felt like forever. Finally, she said that she thought she had saw something, but it was probably just her cat. She then quickly put the album in her hand and switched off the record player, roughly grabbing up the white album record and jamming it back into its jacket, too. I could tell something was really bothering Jane, because she was usually very careful with the albums. But when I questioned her again, she just said that she was tired of music and wanted to watch TV before going to sleep. She had a TV in her room, so we grabbed a snack and lay on the floor watching sitcom reruns until close to 2 a.m., when we were both too tired to stay awake. Everything seemed pretty normal as Jane got into bed, and I got comfy on the floor. Jane had a chair that unfolded into a sleeping mattress that I used whenever I spent the night, so I was very familiar with it. I fell asleep right away, and must have immediately started dreaming. In my dream, there was a man, very tall and thin with no hair, not even eyebrows or lashes. It was almost like he didn't have any details or color to him at all. I feel like he had a face, but I don't remember what it looked like, and I couldn't tell you if he wore any clothing or if he was just detailless all over like a Ken doll. It's like he was a blank person, except he glowed slightly. Like putting an LED light into a pearly white balloon, if that makes sense. He was sitting on the floor a few feet away, and I had sat up on my mattress turning to face him. The glowing man was communicating with me, but I had to really concentrate to understand what he was saying. It reminds me now of trying to hear dialogue over the radio when the station isn't coming in clear. It wasn't a loud sounding interference. I'm not even sure if he was actually speaking out loud, but it seemed like something was scrambling his words. I was able to understand him after some time, and he started to explain to me that the world, quote, your world, as he put it, was not how it seemed on the surface, and that if I wanted to, I could see the world for how it really was. He used a lot of words I'd never heard before or since, and I have no idea what they meant, and kind of like technical jargon, but I was able to understand the majority of what he said. The glowing man told me all I had to do to be able to see the real world was make a choice. He said the object of choice didn't actually matter, but it was the act of choosing. Whether to live the way I had always lived or be given the ability to see the world for how it truly was. That was the important part. It seemed really important to him that I knew the item that he was about to offer me were purely symbolic. A visual representation of choosing A or B. Then he asked me if I was ready to decide. I don't think that if I'd been given 20 days, I would have truly been ready. For some reason, this choice terrified me, more than the strange glowing man. It felt like the biggest choice I would ever face, and if I chose wrong, I would regret it forever. But I eventually did say yes. I was ready to choose. Instantly, the man was closer to me, but I didn't see him actually move. All I could see was his strange blank face and his hands, now palms up in front of me. All around us, the room had become a black void. There was a small object in the palm of each hand, and he explained that if I chose his right hand, to the left from my perspective, then I would be awakened to the true world. If I chose from his left hand, my right, then I would continue on with my life as I knew it, unchanged from the person I currently was. I looked down to the items in his palms and saw that they were pills. The one that was to my left was an intense fiery orange-red, and the right was a serene greenish-blue. Both of them seemed to glow lightly, just like the man. I remember the immense fear and dread I felt about making the wrong choice. I really wanted to pick the blue-green one because it was a pretty color. Green is my favorite color, and I've always hated orange. But I was compelled to take the orange one. Even as I stared at the pretty greenish color, almost like I was longing for it, I felt my left arm moving and my left hand reached for the orange one. I remember thinking that I should choose the pill on the left, despite the color, because I was left-handed. A really arbitrary way to make a life-altering decision, I know. As the fingers on my left hand made contact with the orange pill, my dream suddenly ended and my eyes snapped open. I was lying on my back on the mattress, but my head and shoulders had slid sideways onto the cold basement floor. I could remember the dream vividly, and I was so afraid that I was shivering. I called out quietly to Jane to see if she was awake, wanting to tell her about my crazy nightmare, and I thought I heard her say yes. I sat up, but it felt like I was moving in slow motion, like I was in a swimming pool with heavy weights on my limbs. As I turned my head to look at Jane, I noticed a glow. It was the same blue-white LED glow of the blank man from my dream. I looked over my shoulder. My mattress was positioned parallel to Jane's bed so that the head and feet were facing the same direction. To see Jane still asleep, lying flat on her back. Directly above her was the head and torso of the blank man, facing down toward her, but he was coming out of the wall above her bed. This would have been impossible. Not that moving through wood or plaster walls is something I would consider likely to happen, but the head of her bed was pushed directly against the cinder block basement wall, and there was nothing on the other side of it besides earth. There was even a tiny ventilation window a few feet away high up on that same wall, so I know for a fact that it was an outside wall and not an interior one. I called to Jane again, but she didn't move or wake up, though. It seemed like the glowing torso bending out of the wall above her tilted slightly in my direction, like it saw me. I really wanted to reach out and shake Jane awake, but I was terrified to get anywhere near that glowing man. Even though it didn't seem like he wanted to harm me in my dream, now that I was awake, all I felt was terror. There was a menacing feeling that rolled off of him, and I'm ashamed to admit that, in my fear, I bolted upstairs, abandoning Jane to the glowing man. I hid in the bathroom for what felt like forever, but I began to shiver from cold as well as fear, and I was scared Jane's parents would find me out of bed. They were pretty strict. Plus, I felt guilty for leaving and wanted to check on her. When I finally managed to work up the courage to walk back through the kitchen and down to the basement, I remember the clock on her microwave said that it was 3:30 a.m. I tried to be quiet as I went down the basement stairs, but it was an old house, and they were very creaky. As I was pushing the beads over the doorway, I saw Jane sitting up in bed. I asked her if she was okay, and she said she was, but she looked frightened. She said she woke up and saw that I was gone and asked if I was okay. I told her I was, but that I'd had a nightmare. She then asked me if I ever talked in my sleep before. I said yes. At least I did when I was younger and shared a room with my sister, but I couldn't say if I did it anymore. My sister and I both had occasions where we were talking to each other before bed and thought we were both still awake, until something someone said was nonsensical in their sleep. Can talking in your sleep be a family trait? Anyway, hearing that I had talked in my sleep before seemed to calm Jane down a little bit. She then asked what my nightmare was about. I didn't want to tell her, mostly because I didn't want to explain to her about waking up to see the blank torso coming out of the wall over her while she slept, and then running away. But I did tell her everything. As I spoke, she got really quiet. And when I got to the part where the glowing man was looking down at her through the wall above her head, I could see that she was truly frightened. I asked her if she'd had a nightmare too, and she said no. Jane told me that I fell asleep before her. I also snore, but it took her a while to settle down enough to sleep. Jane said that just as she was dozing off, she heard me say something, but she couldn't understand what it was. She said that she turned in my direction to see that I was sitting up and facing away from her and mumbling quietly. She tried to get my attention, but she couldn't. After a couple of attempts to get me to wake up or talk to her, she said that she clearly heard me say choose one before I slumped back over onto my mattress. Jane said that she was freaked out, but she forced herself to lie down, trying to convince herself I was just dreaming and talking in my sleep. She did eventually fall asleep, until the sound of me coming down the stairs woke her up. She never saw the glowing man, and again stated that she didn't dream anything, but she still seemed just as scared as I was. We decided to spend the rest of the night both sleeping in her bed, which was not the most comfortable as it was only a twin, but I think neither one of us would have gotten back to sleep at all if we didn't have the comfort of the other one nearby. We talked about my dream and what I saw after I woke up again the next morning, and a few other times as well, but it didn't help either of us make sense of it. We continued to be best friends, spending most of our time together until the 10th grade. Over the years, we had several other strange things happen to us. I think that is what eventually caused us to drift apart. As we got older, Jane wasn't as interested in the supernatural, and she really didn't like talking about our shared experiences, especially the glowing man. By 10th grade, we had completely drifted away from each other, only sharing an occasional hello in the halls at school. Now, I know what you must be thinking. That I'm either making all of this up completely, or that I had seen the Matrix movie, or at least a trailer for the movie, and those images got mixed up in my head as part of a nightmare, and it was not anything supernatural or special. But the night I dreamt about the glowing man and choosing which pill to take happened in the fall when I was 14 years old, in 1993. According to Google, The Matrix didn't release in theaters in the US until March 31st of 1999, and the trailer wouldn't have come out until earlier that year, or possibly the end of '98 at the earliest. They didn't even start shooting the movie until March of 1998, a full 5 years after I'd had that dream. And while, yes, the internet did exist in 1993, neither Jane or I had a computer in our homes until '95, '96 from my house. And there's a book that the movie may have been based on that was written in 1981, but I've never read it. And I didn't see the movie until I was in video rental stores. I swear by everything I hold dear that I had no knowledge of the Matrix movie or any books until after it had come out in theaters. When I saw the movie for the first time, I had rented it from Blockbuster Video and watched it at home by myself. When I got to the scene where Morpheus offers Neo the pills, my stomach dropped. Yes, the pills in the movie were a slightly different color than the ones in my dream. And Morpheus is not a glowing, detailless man, and I definitely don't resemble Neo at all, but the scene felt way too familiar because I'd already experienced it 5 years earlier. Though I don't have the ability to dodge bullets or fly, I'm really not athletic at all. I have felt like something inside me changed that night that I had the dream. I've always felt odd or out of step with the rest of the world, and that feeling intensified after that night. And strange things happen to and around me all the time. Many times I have encountered entities or shadow people. I get strong intuitions about events and people's emotions on a near daily basis, and oftentimes there is a falseness or artificiality to the world that leaves me feeling unsettled. This looming sense of dread that gets stronger every year. When we talk about the history of the United States, particularly the era of westward expansion into what was then called Indian Territory, Fort Leavenworth is one of the most prominent spots on the map. Known for being the oldest active military post west of the Mississippi River in the 1800s, it was one of the most important stops for any enterprising pioneer that had crossed the Mississippi and was on their way to make their fortune out west. The fort itself was established in 1827 by Henry Leavenworth and was originally known as Cantonment Leavenworth. During the fort's early days, its primary function was to secure the Santa Fe Trail, to help protect the fur trade that passed through the area, and later on the Oregon Trail and the other various routes west that began to spring up. The soldiers at the fort were often the security detail for traders and wagon caravans that moved ever further into the uncharted wilderness of the West. And as such, there are no shortages of bloody conflict in the area. The lives of natives, soldiers, bandits, and pioneers ended on that soil. At one point, in May of 1829, the entire fort was evacuated by the military, and the Kickapoo tribe occupied it over the summer and into the fall of that year, when the army managed to recapture the fort. In 1839, Colonel Stephen Kearny would march against the Cherokee with the largest cavalry force ever assembled in U.S. history. 10 companies of dragoons, which would be between 1,000 and 2,000 mounted troops. By 1859, with the passage of the Kansas-Nebraska Acts, the primary role of Fort Leavenworth shifted when it began doing its level best to keep the lid on the brewing troubles between pro-slavery and anti-slavery groups in the area during the time, known as the Bleeding Kansas era. It's also of note that in 1857 to 58, it was from Fort Leavenworth that General Albert Sidney Johnston rode out to bring the Mormons in Utah back under federal jurisdiction. During the Civil War, when the western outposts were undermanned, the local native tribes began regularly raiding the railroad encampments and attacking the crews sent to build the expanding artery to the west. Confederate prisoners of war were often conscripted to go into the wilds and combat these natives and bring an end to their raiding. The primary reason for the natives raiding the railroad so vigorously was the violation of multiple treaties by the U.S. government, who constantly failed to uphold their end of the bargain, and this increasingly ramped up tensions and hostilities among the tribes. During a period of less than 30 years, that's 1865 to 1891, the U.S. military at Fort Leavenworth engaged in no fewer than 100 battles with the Apache, the Cheyenne, the Modoc, the Kickapoo, and other tribes. It would be very remiss of me to not mention that the first two of all black cavalry regiments were formed at Leavenworth in the days after the Civil War. The 9th and 10th Cavalry regiments were often sent to engage the native tribes in battle, and the natives held the men in high regards. They began referring to them as the Buffalo Soldiers, and, to this day, a monument honoring them stands at Leavenworth. It was in 1875 that the United States Disciplinary Barracks was established. This is one of the things that the fort is most known for, as it is the only maximum security prison within the Department of Defense, and services all branches of the military. Notably, it operates the same buildings from 1875 until 2002, when new barracks were established. The older barracks housed over 1,000 federal prisoners, while the newer barracks holds around 500. During the days after World War II, Leavenworth became the temporary home for Nazi POWs before their ultimate execution at the fort. Now that we've gone over some history, let's get into the good stuff, the hauntings. All of this has been to establish the context and the bloody history of the fort. With such a history, and more that I didn't touch upon for the sake of time and generally not droning on like this is a thesis paper, I think it comes as a surprise to no one that Fort Leavenworth is regarded as the most haunted, active military post on U.S. soil. While many of the old historic buildings still stand, the base itself has been quite thoroughly modernized, but the older parts are definitely seen as haunted. A good number of spirits and other ghostly happenings are said to take place on the old fort's grounds, with most of the spirits theorized to be those of executed prisoners, or those that died while being housed in the barracks. Some are also thought to be from the National Cemetery that lies just beyond the walls. So, just for you, my dear audience, we've gone down the rabbit hole of the internet and found some examples of known hauntings on the old grounds. 1. The Ghostly Tea Party. At 624 Scott Avenue, the Chief of Staff's quarters are said to still host ghostly tea parties within the parlor. While there have yet to be any sightings of apparitions, there are steady streams of reports that say the noises of a tea party, a general chatter and clinking of dishes, can be heard from a completely empty parlor. 2. The Phantom Priest of St. Ignatius. In 1871, the first Catholic church, St. Ignatius, was built on the grounds. And in 1875, the church and attached rectory burned, claiming the life of the young priest who was assigned to said church. Many materials of the original church were salvaged and reused in the reconstruction of the building, and as such, the site of many scorched bricks can be seen in the facade of the church. But another unprecedented carryover from the original building lingers in the form of young Father Fred, who is often spotted walking the building in his ethereal priest robes. In the 1970s, Father Fred's apparition even appeared in a photograph taken at a dinner party. 3. The Disgraced General. Perhaps one of the most nefarious figures in U.S. history is said to roam the old general's quarters located at 1 Scott Avenue. A General Armstrong Custer is said to roam the halls of the old residence. They say the attachment to Leavenworth is due to it being the location where he was court-martialed in 1867 for leaving his command and mistreating his troops. The hearing is said to have taken place in the general's quarters, where he was handed a 1-year suspension without pay. He was later reinstated and rejoined the 7th Cavalry in 1868, where he served until the disastrous battle at Little Bighorn in 1876. 4. The Haunted Towers. The area around the disciplinary barracks is ringed by a dozen watchtowers, and even before the barracks was closed, not all of these towers were manned. Over time, Tower 8, which has not been renovated in years, and was not manned at all during the later years of the barracks being open, has gained a reputation as being quite haunted. At a time when other towers were manned, Tower 8 was completely blocked from entry, and the only way to reach it was via the walkway connecting to another tower. And yet, often the guards would report seeing movement in the tower. The control tower would even receive phone calls from Tower 8 despite it not having a phone installed. At one time, a patrol car reported a soldier manning the tower and pointing his rifle at them. The story goes that long ago a soldier ended his own life in the tower via a self-inflicted gunshot, and it sounds like even in the afterlife he still carries on his duties. 5. The Rookery. The Rookery is the oldest house on post, and has been continuously inhabited since its construction in 1832. It's said to have many ghostly occupants, and has earned the reputation as the most haunted house in Kansas. The most common apparition is that of a woman with flowing black hair that will rush people with her claws bared for an attack. Another of the ghostly inhabitants is a young girl that is often seen or heard having herself a right proper tantrum. There's also a chatty old woman often seen in the corner carrying on a conversation with another unseen person. Some people have also told stories of being roused from their sleep by an old man with bushy hair clad in a nightshirt. And 6. Sumner Place. This is less a specific house, and more the entire neighborhood that is haunted by the benevolent spirit of an older woman in a woolen black dress, with a shawl draped around her shoulders. The reports regarding her say that she was at one point a live-in nanny for a family that resided here, and she often tries to help the families in the neighborhood out by handling the domestic chores, such as washing the dishes or making the beds. The stories also say that she has a fondness for children, and will often try to comfort ones that are in distress. A young boy once told his mother that the nice old lady would sit and read him bedtime stories when he couldn't sleep at night. These are just a few short examples of some of the ghostly going-ons at Fort Leavenworth. Visitors are more than welcome to come and explore the historic military post. The caveat being that any visitor over the age of 16 must have some kind of valid government ID, such as driver's license or state ID, and all vehicles are subject to a search before being granted entry onto the base. So, if you're ever in Kansas, like I once was, and feel like exploring a very historically interesting and supernaturally charged place, maybe stop by Fort Leavenworth and give old General Custer the finger for Tom and his ancestors. Hey Raven, I wanted to share something that happened to a few friends and I last year during a 4th of July get-together. My friend Lee invited some of us to his parents' place for a cookout. What was so special about their place was that it was in the middle of nowhere. When Lee left the state for college, they downsized on their home and bought a small farmhouse-style house surrounded by trees for miles. They had more acreage than square footage of the house. I don't know if they were planning on making the house bigger or not, but it wasn't a bad house by any means. It was in good condition, 2-bedroom, 1.5 bath, flat level. It was perfect for them. I've known Lee since I was a kid, so I knew his parents pretty well too. Anyway, just trying to give a little detail about the place we were going to be staying. His parents were going to be visiting his mom's sister, his aunt, for the holiday, and they told Lee he could use their place. The cool thing about it was that we could do whatever we wanted out there. No worries about people complaining we were too loud or shooting fireworks off too late into the night. Just a chill night for some of us friends to get together. Something we didn't get to do very often anymore. It was myself, my girlfriend Bree, Lee and his girl Nicole, and then two of our other friends, James and Miguel. We all brought our part, including foods, drinks, and a few fireworks. I know I said that we would have no issues with fireworks out there, but we also weren't very big on them. Like, we grew out of them, but there were still a few things we liked to do. Bottle rockets, Roman candles, and such. Because, we're mature adults. Anyway, we all showed up there on our first night, and we probably talked more than anything, forgetting that none of us had even thought about dinner. So that just became a free-for-all on the snacks. It was a much-needed getaway, and we were all in great spirits that night. The following night was the 4th, and we were planning a full-on cookout. Lee had the grill fired up, making whatever the hell we had that he could cook. We all played frisbee together. Some of us shot bottle rockets at each other because we're still stupid. But we were having a blast. As the afternoon faded into the evening, the girls suggested that we make a bonfire. They had a fire pit a little further out, so it was already there for us. We gathered some branches and dried leaves and quickly had a fire going. We all sat by drinking, chilling, and legit just having a good time. I hadn't seen these people in a while, and that was my kind of night. Around midnight, I think we all started fading a bit. We were all in our seats, lying back, light talking or giggling, but for the most part, we had all calmed down quite a lot. Probably more crashing after such an active and hot day. The trees blocked out most of the moonlight, leaving us with just our dying fire. We stopped feeding it, knowing that we would probably all be going back in soon. As we all sat there silently watching the fire, we started hearing a rustling noise coming from the trees. The first thought in my head was that it was some nocturnal animal out there, probably not used to people being out in their area this late. But then I started really focusing on the sounds. It sounded different, like footsteps, but also like someone was dragging their feet or something along with them, maybe. Not a sound you would expect for wildlife, especially if it was a predator. We were in an area that was common for mountain lions, but I've heard them walk and it wasn't like that. I'd been leaning back looking at the sky when I heard this, and when I started to notice the irregularities. I then looked down to see everyone staring toward the tree line behind me. Nicole mentioned nervously that maybe it was a deer, but I don't think Lee picked up on her wanting that reassurance. He immediately shook his head and said that it wasn't a deer, but that he had no idea what it was. I could tell by Nicole's face that she was pretty scared at that point. Bree ended up going back in the house with her, trying to get her mind off of it. Bree was a little more understanding in knowing that we were in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by wilderness. There were going to be a lot of things out there, but she was also good friends with Nicole, so I could tell by the look she gave me that she was just going to take her inside to keep her busy. However, the rest of us were still curious about what it could have been. I still couldn't place the sound, and when I asked Lee, he said he wasn't sure either. But then he mentioned that it did sound like something was dragging, so I at least assumed I was right about that. James suggested that we check it out, and Lee hesitated for a moment. If we had the same thought in mind, he was trying to decide if it was safe. If whatever that thing is would be fearful of us or not. He must have figured that we were good because he stood up and motioned for us to follow. We all stood up and moved behind the chairs. Miguel made a joke about the boogeyman, and we all had some laughs about it. But then we were stopped dead in our tracks when we heard this low, guttural growl coming from the trees. It wasn't like any animal I've ever heard. It was deep and wet, and it immediately put me on edge. It almost sounded like something from a sci-fi movie, no lie. I had no guesses at this point. It stopped us all in our tracks as we listened to it continue with no breaks in the growling for over 10 seconds. What could even go on that long? Lee, however, began walking again, clearly determined to not back down and to not look like a coward. I don't know why, but then the rest of us didn't move. He walked closer to the tree line, and when he was about a foot away, we saw these piercing yellow eyes come out from behind a tree. It wasn't yellow from, like, that reflection that eyes get on light. They were legit bright yellow. We couldn't make out anything else on the creature other than its eyes both facing forward, and it had a large, dark shape. It appeared to be quadrupedal, or at least hunched over like one, but we couldn't even tell if it had fur or not. We all froze in our place when we saw the eyes, but then Lee slowly reached into his pocket. He pulled out his phone and turned on the flashlight and went to point it at the creature. The only thing we saw for a brief second was a deep red, and it looked wet, like blood. But before we could even process what we were looking at, this thing let out another loud growl, showing us its teeth, and then it ran up the tree. We all backed up, not knowing what it was doing at first, until we saw it grab onto the tree and climb, jump by jump. I continued to back up, not wanting whatever the hell this was to pounce on me, but then we could see it jump from one of the trees to the next, and then the next. What the hell could climb a tree like that? And what the hell could have made those sounds? What the hell has those kind of bright yellow eyes? It could have possibly been injured and then still escape like that. I was over it once I saw it jump through the trees. It wasn't making sense to me, and I quite honestly didn't want to find out anymore. I turned to run toward the house and saw that James was already running. I followed after him, and when I turned to look, so were the other two. When we got back to the house, we all calmed down before we walked inside, not wanting to freak out the girls. But it was too late. As we walked in, we heard them shriek and ran to the back where the spare room was, the room where Bree and I were staying. They had their backs against the south wall closest to the door, staring with terrified eyes at the window. I asked what had happened, and they said they had just been talking when there was a loud thud against the window. That alone made them jump, but then they also saw the glowing yellow eyes. Lee walked away and I heard the side door open. I followed him out into the back where the bedroom window was. With his phone light on, we looked around that part of the house, and we saw a lump on the ground below the window. When we got closer, we could tell that it was a recently killed rabbit. I won't go into any further details past that, other than to say that it had clearly been thrown or maybe slammed into the window. It didn't look right. None of this did. There was no one around for miles, and we were on private property, so no one should be around. There was a creature with yellow eyes and a weird build/posture that could climb trees. It also appeared to be injured based on the bloody spot that we saw, yet it didn't seem to slow it down any. Then, either that same thing that was jumping away from the house managed to get back to it before us and scare the girls, or there were multiples out there. And was the rabbit supposed to be some kind of threat, maybe? All I know is, after that, we all went back in and we had to tell Bree and Nicole what we saw, because they knew something was up, and we all hardly slept. We all camped out in the living room, now fully awake. With no more excitement for the night, we finally started to calm down. Bree and Nicole actually fell asleep on the love seat, Lee on the couch, I slept on the floor. Miguel ended up back in the room that we started in, and James slept in the other room. He was behind the couch for a while, but I think he must have woken up and gone to the bedroom. The next morning was a bit awkward. No one really talked about what happened the night before, and I personally didn't know what there was to say. We all know what we saw. The guys, especially, but the girls saw those eyes. We all got up and shuffled around the house for a bit and had breakfast. And then Lee suggested we leave early and go to an amusement park that wasn't far from where we were. No one disagreed. It was clear what Lee's intentions were. We all packed up and left and had a great time at the park, but Lee, Miguel, and I talked about what we saw while we were waiting in line for something. Apparently, Lee went back out to check for that rabbit before we left, and he said that it was gone completely. No signs of it other than a slight mess left on the window, which he cleaned up with the water hose. I suggested that he tell his parents to install some cameras, like trail cams or deer cams, to see if he could catch whatever those things were, and he said that he was going to bring it up to them. I even offered to help him install them if they did. So far, that hasn't happened, but I also don't know how much he told his parents. Part of me really wants to know what we saw out there, but I'm also terrified to know the truth. The thing fled from us, like it felt threatened, but at the same time, the thing with the rabbit makes me think that it did that to threaten us. And I don't think that exact behavior is common in wildlife, or at least none that I'm familiar with around that area. Sorry for not giving any details of the area, but since it is private property, I don't want anyone to get any ideas. If they ever do set up some cameras and or see something like that again, I'll be sure to give an update. Until then, I'll also be keeping up with Lee from the safety of my own neighborhood. Hey Raven, big fan. This story starts in 2020. It was the middle of the COVID pandemic. As a high schooler, I usually spent most of my nights gaming with friends and sleeping a few hours before online classes. The classes usually ended quickly because my professors had a hard time adjusting to the whole online thing. So, tired from the whole non-sleeping thing, I decided to go to sleep as soon as classes ended. The first time I woke up, I had a horrific nightmare and woke up sweating with shortness of breath. It was around 5 p.m., and I decided to try to sleep a bit more. During the second sleep, I had sleep paralysis. Nothing weird happened, but it was just a weird feeling for me, and after all that, I was still tired. Two important things for the sake of this story are that when I was 10, I was gifted a digital clock that beeped every hour. But because it got old, it started beeping 4 minutes later. And the second thing is that I always, and I mean always, locked my door during that time, because I have brothers and didn't want to be interrupted by them. After that sleep paralysis, I was just rolling into my bed and couldn't get to sleep, and the clock beeped at 9:04. In my mind, I'm thinking it's okay, I have a long time to get back to sleep. Moments later, it beeped 10:04, then 11:04, 12:04, 1, and then 2:04. And I couldn't get to sleep. I was a bit frustrated, but it was kind of understandable because I slept the whole evening. After a few moments, it beeped 3:04, as everyone who watches horror movies and scary stories would know I was feeling a little scared. After some time, I started hearing footsteps in the hall. And that's normal because I have room next to the toilet, and I thought that one of my family members woke up and needed to go. So I hear these footsteps, and they stopped next to my door, which was very strange. But this time my heart was pounding, and I was breaking into a sweat. Then I heard my door open, and at that time I knew that something wasn't normal. I completely forgot that I had locked my door and thought that maybe my mother wanted to see if I was asleep. But something started walking towards me. I was lying facing the other side of my door, my pulse racing, and I was sweating even more. Then, when it got to my bed, it touched my hip, and I immediately fell asleep. In the morning, while I was terrified of the thing that had happened, I casually went to the toilet, but my door was locked. In the following days, I had bruises on my forearms, in both hands and inner thighs. They were all bruised up like I was in a fight. And, well, that's it. Thank you for reading my story. I hope that your listeners felt the same goosebumps I feel every time I tell this story. Okay, this is something that happened to me just last week, and I'm still freaking out. I need to know if anyone else has experienced something similar. I work for a local tech company in Colorado. Nothing exciting for you or me. I work at the corporate level of stuff, so it's actually pretty boring. My day-to-day work is pretty normal, and I rarely stray from my normal schedule. I even take the same route home because it's typically a straight shot on the highway. So, last Friday, I left the office around 6 p.m., same as always. I got on the entrance ramp for the highway and started my 40-minute drive home. I do tend to run into some slowdown on the highway, typically near other entry ramps, but nothing too crazy. But on this day, there seemed to be more of a backup than normal. We were now at a crawl. I remember being annoyed and confused, as there were no signs for construction, so either people were having trouble understanding how to merge and speed up when entering a highway, or there was an accident. I couldn't do anything about it, so I just turned up my music a bit and tried to relax, knowing that I was heading into a weekend. But then I started smelling something awful, like burning rubber mixed with something chemical. My first thought was that it just confirmed that there was probably an accident. As we inched forward slowly, barely moving 10 miles per hour, I finally saw the cause of the holdup. There was definitely an accident, but it was what I saw that was bizarre to me. The car was a dark gray 2018-ish Honda Civic, which was the same make and model and color of my own car. There was even a small dent in the rear bumper, and a Colorado Avalanche sticker on the back window just like mine. But the front end was completely destroyed, like it had plowed directly into something at high speeds. The hood was crumpled up, windshield shattered, and airbags deployed. This was a pretty bad accident, but there were no other cars on the side. The car looking identical to mine was crazy enough, but what really made me do a double take was the guy leaning against it. He looked just like me. Maybe not identical, but close enough that it was deeply unsettling. Same build, same haircut, short on sides, longer on top, wearing what looked like the exact outfit that I had on. A navy blue button-down with black slacks. A company uniform, or at least business casual. I was clearly doing what people normally do when they see an accident, and slow down even more to gawk at it, but my reason was completely different. It was like I was looking at myself in another dimension. And as I got closer, the guy made eye contact with me. He waved kind of casually at first, but then more urgently, like he needed to get my attention. I don't know why I did this, but I pulled over. This is not something I would normally do. I'm not the type to stop for strangers on the highway or side of the road. I always think about those horror stories of people who get carjacked that way, or even worse. But something told me that I needed to be there at that moment. He jogged up to my car, and I rolled down the window. I asked him if he was okay, and he nodded, saying that he was. His voice even sounded familiar. It didn't sound like mine, but like someone I've known forever. It's hard to explain. Then I asked if he needed a ride out of there. Again, I don't know why the hell I would have offered that. I don't ever offer rides to people. It was strange knowing that I just asked that, feeling compelled to, but also knowing that I shouldn't have. But the man's response was just as strange to me. He had this weird, subtle laugh and said, "From you? Nah, man, I'm good." What did he mean by, "from you"? I didn't know this guy. But maybe that's also why he didn't want to ride. So I asked him if he needed to call someone else, or if there was something I could do to help him out. I'll never forget his face when he looked at me with a pitiful smile and said, "I just need you to stay awake, Kevin." That hit me like a bucket of ice water. My name is Kevin. I hadn't told him that. It's not like I was wearing a name tag or something, so how did he know? I thought about this conversation and drove away, and as I thought about it more, I noticed just how tired I was feeling. Like, I was struggling to keep my eyes open, kind of tired. I started to not feel safe being on the highway that was now clear and told myself I needed to pull over, and then I woke up in my driveway. It was dark. I looked at my phone and it was 10 p.m. I have absolutely zero memory of driving home. None. I don't remember exiting the highway, stopping at the red light, or swerving to get around the giant pothole at the intersection. It's all just a complete blank. I sat there trying to process what had happened. Did I fall asleep at the wheel? If so, how did I get home safely? I've been on autopilot before, when you take the same path and have to stop to think if you stopped at that stop sign, or not remember just part of your drive. I have experienced that, but I typically remember getting to my destination, or some part of the drive. But I can't remember anything other than that accident. Then my heart dropped, thinking maybe I did fall asleep. Maybe that was my accident, and I was experiencing some kind of out-of-body thing. I jumped out of my car and looked around for damage, but the car was fine. It's still a little bump in the back, but otherwise, it was in perfect shape. I immediately grabbed my phone to check for accidents, and found nothing. After seeing my car and myself were physically fine, I went inside still feeling exhausted, and decided to go to bed. The next day, I checked the police reports and news again for accidents, and found nothing along the highway that I took. Did the accidents not happen either? And how? I remember stopping, talking to the guy, smelling the fluids from the accident. Then there was what the guy told me, to stay awake. Was that a dream? A hallucination of some sort? Or the universe's way of telling me to stay awake? I still have no idea. I've told a few friends and my sister about what I experienced, and they all think it's just as bizarre. Some have joked about me being lucky and driving home half asleep, while others, like my sister, think I should go to the doctor to make sure there's nothing wrong with me. I'm still debating on that one, but nothing else like that has happened since. I've driven home all week and there were no issues. I didn't wake up in my driveway, there were no other accidents, and I never felt that tired again. So what did I experience that day? Was this just a dream? Was that guy from some other timeline stopping me from being in the same fate, or worse? I still have no answers, but I hope that it never happens again, because not knowing what happened, having half an hour completely missing, is one of the most terrifying things I have ever experienced. Hi, Raven. It's been a while. I was the one who wrote the story about what shadow people are, and why eye masks work for me to prevent their appearance. I have more thoughts on what shadow people are, and how they work. These are my thoughts based on what I've seen and heard from others, and this may not be true for everyone. Some themes I've noticed with shadow people stories are as follows. 1. They seem to behave differently than sleep paralysis. I've never had sleep paralysis myself, yet have seen shadow people while half asleep. Not to say that you can't see shadow figures while under sleep paralysis, but the two don't seem to be mutually exclusive. 2. There's only one in most cases. That is to say, when half asleep or sleep paralyzed, people see shadow people. But they only see one, not multiples. I've never seen multiple. 3. In most cases, and maybe more so with half asleep people like myself than sleep paralyzed people, very interestingly, shadow people will leave you alone. The ones I've seen have never touched or interacted with me, and in most stories they leave others alone. Again, sleep paralysis seems to be different than seeing shadow people. So, what can we conclude from these commonalities? What if shadow people are beings that exist in the realm of between consciousness an unconsciousness or awakened asleep. They could just be beings that live there. My theory is that they're like club bouncers. You're not supposed to be in that in-between state, and I think that their possible purpose is to push one to one side of the awake-asleep fence, or the other. Oddly, I think some possible proof of this is people who use Benadryl as a drug, which has a well-known side effect. It makes one sleepy. They see shadow people too. Even more strangely, when I fall asleep now with my eye mask, now, in my half-asleep states, I sometimes experience feeling a shifting, feeling like my room or reality has changed, or I forgot something really important. Now, I know that these feelings aren't real. I haven't really shifted realities or forgotten something important, but what if these strange feelings are the shadow people trying to bounce me to one side or the other of the awake-asleep fence, since I can't see them anymore? All I can say is these strange feelings, which I know aren't real and don't feel bad, are much better than getting the crap scared out of you by seeing a shadow figure. I hope these observations can maybe help someone. And thank you for reading, Raven. Well, this isn't exactly a cryptid, so how about just a strange experience? I hope it gives you a laugh. The dogs had spotted something strange and freaked out, scaring it so bad that it ran into the side of the tin barn that someone rudely built across its path. Crash, boing. We were inside. You should have heard the reverb. Slightly alarmed, we went outside to see what was up. It was an armadillo, trying to dig a hole to escape the dogs. Neither we nor the dogs had ever seen an armadillo before. We stood around and marveled for a while, except Dad, who was 1,000 miles away with the moving van getting the second load. We had to show it to Dad. So, I picked it up by the tail and we barricaded it in a room with some cat food and water. That night, it got loose. You know why armadillos are called Texas speed bumps? When they get startled, they buck. So, even if you straddle them with the wheels, they buck and get clobbered by the undercarriage of a car. Apparently, as it was wandering under Mom's bed, it bumped one of the cross pieces of the foundation and got startled. Nothing goes bump in the night like an armadillo under the bed. Mom got a rude awakening. She chased it into the bathroom and then dragged me out off of bed to wrangle it from where it wedged itself behind the commode. So there I was, lying on the cool concrete floor beside the commode, arms stretched past my head to grab its tail, and this armadillo would not budge. I was so tired that I kept falling asleep, and Mom kept yelling at me and poking me in the ribs. Finally, I did get it out, and we barricaded it more securely in the other room. I don't know how I ended up with the blame. Mom approved the endeavor, and we all helped with the barricades. This happened when I was 26, back in 2001. I was going through a divorce, and I lived for a brief time by myself in my Uncle Gavin's house. A lovely, contemporary 2-level home. My uncle's neighbor Michael asked me to house sit for him for 1 week while he vacationed in Florida. He paid me $200 up front to sleep over there, and to keep his 37 plants watered. I counted. Michael's house was larger and old, as are many of the houses in this part of the city. I was a little spooked at having to enter only through the back way every night, as he requested, because it required climbing up the deck stairs first. That's why it greatly disappointed me when the deck light burned out the first night that I stayed there. But I'm a big girl, and I just resigned myself to entering the dark. I was annoyed, either that day or the next, when the light over the kitchen sink also burned out. But old house wiring sucks like that sometimes. The next evening I came home and had gotten seated in the living room, which faces the kitchen. when I noticed that the kitchen cabinet was wide open. I didn't use the kitchen, at least not that part of it. I only used the kitchen to make coffee, and that cabinet was nowhere near the coffee. I knew that cabinet had been shut earlier. I shut the cabinet and tested to see how firmly it stayed shut. Very firmly. It was not the type to swing open for any reason, and if it wasn't latched, it would not appear shut at all. But okay, whatever, there must be some explanation. The next evening, I came home to find the cabinet at the hutch at the top of the stairs was wide open. Again, this cabinet had been closed previously. I shut it, of course, and was wondering what was going on. That night I was pretty spooked, so I decided to sleep in the living room instead of the bedroom. Not sure why this felt safer, other than the fact that it was closer to the exit. I turned the overhead living room light on and dimmed it so that I could sleep, but still have light. I went to sleep and awoke 45 or so minutes later. When I opened my eyes, the light was completely out. The room was dark. I lay there frozen in fear, not paralysis, just plain I'm too freaking scared to move, for maybe 20 minutes. Finally, I forced myself off the couch and over to the dimmer switch. I turned the switch and the light came back on. It had simply been turned down, but by what or whom? I wasn't such a big girl that night. I went home and slept. I persuaded a friend to stay over for the remainder of my time there, and there were no more strange occurrences. When Michael got home from his vacation, I told him of the strange activity, and he said that nothing like that had ever happened to him there. However, a couple of years later, my Uncle Gavin was chatting with Michael, and Gavin brought up my weird experiences at Michael's house. Immediately, Michael admitted to my uncle that when he had first moved into the house, he would hear footsteps coming up the stairs so frequently that he eventually stopped getting up to check, since nobody was ever there. Why did Michael not tell me this? I can only assume he didn't want to, 1, scare me away from the house sitting beforehand, and 2, admit that it was haunted now that he had me stay there. But I have one more story of a house sitting haunting. Originally, I didn't consider this a haunting. I blamed myself, thinking I had sleepwalked, but I've never sleepwalked before or since, and now I feel like it was probably something else. In this particular bedroom where I was staying, there was a plastic shelving unit, such as the inexpensive kind you buy and assemble yourself. It was full of puppets and stuffed animals. I never messed with the shelf, having no reason to, but I woke up one morning to find that a stuffed wolf was in my arms, and a few other of the stuffed animals were in the bed with me. I glanced over to find that the shelving unit was completely gone. Stunned, I sat up and saw that it had been completely disassembled down to where I could not see it while lying in bed. All the animals and puppets had been thrown around the room. Again, I have no proof that this was paranormal, but I can tell you that I have never been a sleepwalker. The fact that the only 2 times I've house sat have produced strange events makes me never want to house sit again. Hey Raven, I love your channel. Thank you for all the content. You make my work days less boring. Thank you. So, anyway, here's my story. I have a lot of coincidences that happen in my life. So much so that it's become a common inside joke with my boyfriend and I. Sometimes I'll talk to him about some old movie I haven't thought about in years, and then my brother will send me a funny clip from that movie, asking if I remember it. Once I was telling him that my favorite famous line is "Hell hath no fury like a woman scorned," and the next podcast I listened to quoted that line. And things like that. Whenever it happens, my boyfriend looks at me, lifts his eyebrows, and says, "There's another one. What is it with you and these weird coincidences?" Anyway, my friend named my black car Onyx soon after I got it. This is relevant, bear with me here. One day I got a gift from my boyfriend's sister that was a bottle of lotion, and the brand name was Onyx. Soon after, I was watching a video on Facebook Reels, and in the video a girl said, "Hi, my name is Onyx." And that same day, I was at my brother's house and went to use the bathroom. On a shelf above the toilet was one item, a bottle of Onyx lotion. It caught my eye. I told my boyfriend how I kept seeing the word Onyx, and I wondered if it meant something or if it was just a coincidence. A week or so later, I was watching Facebook Reels again, and a woman said, "Hey, this is my dog Onyx." I showed my boyfriend and said, "See? Again." The next day at work, I opened up my Amazon Music app to listen to your podcast. An ad popped up for an album called, you guessed it, Onyx. I took a screenshot and sent it to my boyfriend saying, "This has gotta mean something." About a week later, we drove 3 hours to go shopping. We live in the middle of nowhere, and if you want to shop, you have to drive a long way. Anyway, after we checked out at Barnes & Noble, we were on our way out, and my eyes got drawn to a large sign advertising a new book called Onyx. The words were big, and I pointed at the sign. I got an uneasy feeling, and the sign was huge, like a warning. Less than an hour later, my car, Onyx, died on the road. We had to get a tow. Luckily, we somehow managed to find an auto shop that was able to replace my alternator at 8 p.m. on a Saturday. As we sat there, it dawned on me. I told my boyfriend, "I keep seeing Onyx, and my car's name is Onyx." Realization dawned in his eyes. We believe there are ancestral spirits watching over us and sending us messages. He said they were trying to warn us. Since then, I've not seen the word Onyx again. Kind of weird, but comforting to know that we've got guardians watching over us. Or maybe it's just a weird coincidence. Hey Raven, here's a paranormal twofer for everybody. Story 1. I have crazy neighbors all over my street. Some of them are cool, and some, well, let's just say I'd rather never see again. But there's one in particular who practices black magic. She's posted about it online, and her mother has complained about shadows popping up in their house. Most of the time, the magic hasn't affected me. The keyword being most. It was an unusually warm night in January. We had just gone through a monster thunderstorm and everything was quieting down. Until I heard a couple of thumps and felt my bed shake. At first I thought it was my cats playing underneath it, but then I felt a cold breeze across my face. I knew the window wasn't open and the storm hadn't messed with the roof. I didn't hear any glass break either, but the temperature was dropping rapidly. All of a sudden, then I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up, and suddenly I felt paralyzed, with fear, anxiety, confusion, and my body just felt weighed down by something invisible. I didn't know what was happening, but I just started praying. I recited the Lord's Prayer, the 23rd Psalm, and told whatever it was to leave my house and to never come back in Jesus' name. Instantly, I could move again. The room was warm and everything turned back to the peaceful quiet it had been before. However, that was not the last incident. About a month later, I was getting ready for bed. It was just a typical Wednesday night. Cold, windy, but perfectly clear. Anyway, I was listening to one of your videos, actually, until my phone froze up. The bathroom light flickered, and then a robotic, creepy laugh started coming from behind me. And there I was, paralyzed again. "What do you want?" I thought, and was surprised when it responded out loud. She said we could play in the neighborhood. She loves games. For a second, I couldn't breathe. Then I spoke as firmly as I could to the entity. I said, "You're not welcome here. I'm sending you back to wherever you came from in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. You will never return. You will never address myself or my family. Now, leave." It laughed once more, playing with the lights again, and then silence. Your video resumed, and I could finally move, but this time I was very tired. Sad, too. And I noticed a sulfuric smell on the staircase. That night, I tried, but I just could not sleep. But I did throw out some holy water and Epsom salt around the hole upstairs the next morning. And thankfully, I haven't encountered another demon since. I hope my neighbor stops playing around with demons. They're not stronger than God or his angels, but they're more powerful than we are. Unless we speak the name of Jesus, then they're afraid and will leave. The spirit world is not a joke, y'all. Trust me. Story number 2. I was dreaming one night a few weeks back. During this experience, I was riding in my brother's truck through a very well-known mountain trail on the West Coast. I won't say the city and state to keep this semi-anonymous, but it was absolutely amazing, and I wouldn't mind moving to that region myself. But back to the story. We were playing an older country music station, windows down, when my sister-in-law suggested that he stop for gas. He pulled over at the next exit, and we all got out to stretch our legs. Their dog, Star, not the real name, a golden retriever, not her actual breed, started barking. My sister-in-law took her over to a wooded area so she could run around and do her business and just burn off some energy. I stood back at the truck pacing around until my brother asked if I wanted something to drink. I said yes, and started floating, not walking with him to the store. Remember, this is a dream. The rest of my family, including Star, floated behind us. I reached out my arm and wrapped it around her, pulling her close to me, and that's how we all entered the little store. Nobody seemed to be inside, but an annoyed lady who kept saying, "No dogs allowed, no shoes, no service. Hello, can you hear me?" At least, I thought there was no one else, until a man gently called out to me. "Hey, Heather, come down to the floor. I'll get you some shoes. It looks like you guys left your shoes by your truck. I need to talk to you." I did just that, but who was this? "Here, Susan, quit yelling at them. I'll buy her these pink flower shoes. I just need to talk to her." He paid for the shoes and then handed them to me. I handed Star's leash to my brother and then followed the man outside the store. "Who are you? And are you planning to hurt me?" I asked, feeling uneasy. "No, of course not. I know you, sort of. It's complicated. You see, you've encountered me before during your dreams. We've just never talked. You're in danger of some life-altering things happening to you. Your health, which I already know is bad, and some other things." He didn't say other things, he told me specifically, but it's extremely personal, so I won't be revealing those details. He kept going. "Heather, I need you to stay strong. It will be earth-shattering, and it'll feel like your world is ending, but it's not. Your health will get worse, much worse, before it gets better. But you will get better. You'll feel like a new woman when it's resolved." He hugged me tight and then sent me back into the store, and then I woke up. I wasn't scared, though. Deep down, I just knew it was true. Yes, his words have been coming true. I've cried many tears about all this mess, but I know that it'll be okay. God has me. And as for the man, I'm not sure exactly who he was, but he did seem oddly familiar, though. My new construction home has always had a really weird feel. I moved in 2018 after living in a very actively haunted townhouse. The old house had orbs everywhere, sleep paralysis, hard steps on the stairway, someone trying to break down the door but no one was there, and the usual dark entity floating above my bed. Since I came from such a crazy situation, I was not too worried when my dogs started barking at the same corner all the time, or when I felt people touch me, when no one was there. I live alone with my dogs. This experience happened when I had already been in the house for 7 years. My house had been cleansed of spirits several times, but the last lady told me, "You're too close to a cemetery, so never welcome anything in. No welcome signs, no angel statues outside, etc. Make sure to always have at least one light on in or outside the house." This particular day, I had forgotten to turn on the outdoor lights and went to bed. At around 12:57 a.m., I heard my dogs barking like crazy downstairs. I couldn't hear the outdoor neighborhood dogs barking, which is usually the reason why my dogs started their barking late at night. I yelled for them to stop and immediately felt something come towards me, very quickly from downstairs. I was lying on my stomach and immediately felt paralyzed. That was weird because I was fully awake. Whatever it was got next to my bed, and I could feel it looking at me. I started praying and asking the thing to leave. I don't know what happened next before I lost consciousness. I don't remember after I started praying. But I never felt the entity leave, so I'm not sure how long it was there that night. When I woke up the next morning, I didn't feel it anymore. I have not slept in the dark since. That feeling was the scariest I have had in a long time, and I still don't know what it was. I want to start this entire thing off by saying that this entire write-up is me going rogue. That's Tom going rogue. And doing this on my own. Raven isn't going to even know that this write-up is a thing until he looks in his email and then's going to ask what it is. It's true. Okay, so now that the humor is out of the way, I do want to say that the story is important to me specifically because it really highlights the mental health crisis that is ravaging society. I wrote this not as an indictment, but just to raise awareness because, at this point, how many completely pointless and preventable tragedies have to happen before we begin to take mental health seriously? That is one of the most important issues in the world for me because, and this may shock some of you, I struggle with my own mental health issues every single day, and most of the time it feels like it's an issue that only I take seriously, especially when I'm desperately seeking help for what's going on in my head. That's Tom stating that, not me, just so that's clear. So with all this in mind, let's look at the life and tragic events that led to the death of one of Hollywood's brightest up-and-comers. Johnny Kendrick Lewis was born October 29th of 1983 in Los Angeles, California to Michael and Devona Lewis. He was their middle child and always seemed like a bright and happy kid. His parents were Scientologists, and Johnny was a practicing Scientologist for the majority of his life. After he turned 18 was when Johnny left home to pursue a career in acting. One could say that he definitely found some success early on when he landed smaller roles on TV shows, such as Boston Public, The Guardian, and even appeared in a few episodes of the Nickelodeon series Drake and Josh. He also co-starred in the 2004 movie Raise Your Voice alongside Hilary Duff. It was very clear early on that Johnny had a lot of talent, and a lot to offer show business. And eventually this led him to getting a call from Kurt Sutter, who was casting for this silly little show he was wanting to create, called Sons of Anarchy. Johnny was cast as the club's prospect Kip Halfsack Epps. The show, as most of us know, went on to be wildly successful, with Johnny's character being one of the more popular ones. And some of the crew have said that Johnny was definitely not like the other members of the cast on the show. While the main cast all kind of stuck together and were very much in character on set, Johnny would be off by himself reading poetry. It seems he was never really close with his other cast members, and when he did hang out with people, they were usually his hair and makeup ladies, who just thought the absolute world of the young man. It's from these sources that we learn that Johnny was never really happy while he was working on Sons of Anarchy, and that he really despised the show's themes of violence. It was under these circumstances that in Season 2 of the show he requested that they write his character off. He and Kurt Sutter decided that it would be best to give Halfsack a noble death, than to just have him leave abruptly and die off camera. So, at the end of the second season, his character was killed while trying to protect an infant. There are really no indicators that during his time on the show, Johnny exhibited any of the signs of having mental health or substance issues, with his former hair and makeup lady saying that, while people on the set did use substances, he never did, and that substances just were never really his thing. Although, from here, a lot of the roles he ended up in were even darker and more violent than what he was doing and portraying on Sons. He got a role as a serial killer on Criminal Minds, as well as some other really dark roles. It was after he left Sons of Anarchy that Johnny started to show some signs of depression and struggling a bit with his mental health. But in October of 2011, the day after his birthday, Johnny Lewis would crash his motorcycle while not wearing a helmet. Afterwards, he refused MRIs twice and tried to just go back to his life. But he had changed. He began to exhibit very erratic behavior and bizarre outbursts of violence. One example of this was on January 3rd, 2012, when two men came home to find Johnny Lewis in their house wearing pajamas, and when they told him to leave, he refused. An altercation ensued in which Johnny assaulted both men with a bottle. This would be the first of 3 arrests for the young actor and would mark the moment when his behavior really went into a dramatic decline. And while this was the first instance of the violence he'd had inside him, it would not be the last. On February 10th of 2012, Johnny was arrested again when he struck a man in a parking lot of a Santa Monica yogurt shop. He was arrested again 8 days later, February 18th, when Johnny was attempting to break into a woman's house where she caught him trying to open one of her windows. When she confronted him, he said that he was looking for his friend Bob. She said, "No, you're trying to break into my house." At which point, he just walked away. By this point, people were becoming concerned, not just for the safety of the community as a whole, but for Johnny himself. At this point, it was clear just what a spiral of self-destruction he was in, and everyone began to fear that the worst was bound to happen, sooner rather than later. In September of 2012, Johnny was released from prison. His father arranged for him to get a room at the famous Writer's Villa, an upscale mansion owned and operated by Catherine Davis. The Writer's Villa was kind of a little bed and breakfast which Kathy had run for a long time. Many famous people had found lodging with her over the years, including Brad Pitt. Johnny himself had resided there in 2009. This would be a most unfortunate turn of events for a lot of people, as just 5 days after his release from prison, due to overcrowding, police would be called after Johnny had assaulted 2 of the neighbors. The people who ended up fighting him that day said that it was like he was impervious to pain and had superhuman strength. The victims managed to escape by fleeing inside their house, but Johnny was relentless, and he managed to get his arms in the door before it could be shut all the way. The victims slammed the door on his arm multiple times before Johnny gave up and jumped the fence and vanished inside the villa. When police arrived on the scene, what they found was tragic beyond comparison. Johnny Lewis was found lying dead in the driveway with obvious head trauma. Once the police made entry into the villa and began searching for any signs of Mr. Davis, the police found the true horror. On the second floor of the villa in the master bedroom, they found Mrs. Davis's body. She'd been brutally assaulted with a hammer and strangled to death. In the bathroom, they'd found that her cat had also been killed. These events truly rocked the neighborhood and the greater community as a whole. And in the days to follow, not many of the questions everyone had would truly get satisfactory answers. Now, I know what everyone listening is probably thinking. Sounds like drug-induced psychosis. I'm paraphrasing at best here. However, based on the toxicology reports, Johnny had absolutely no traces of any substance in him at the time of his death, legal or otherwise. The reaction to the news was actually very, very mixed, with some being completely taken off guard by the entire situation, while others, such as Kurt Sutter, would say that while it was tragic, He wasn't shocked that something like this had happened. Now, this particular statement raises some questions with me, because it makes me wonder if, while working on Sons of Anarchy, maybe Kurt had seen some blossoming warning signs. Or if the way Johnny's path ultimately went as a result of the brain trauma from his motorcycle accident. Most of the main cast of Sons, that's Ron Perlman, Katie Seagal, and Charlie Hunnam, made no comment in the aftermath of the tragedy. But other cast and crew did express remorse over the whole incident. This is certainly one of the more tragic stories out of Hollywood and show business, because Johnny had always been such an intelligent and sweet guy. Introspective and artistic. He loved acting, and was definitely going places in the profession. If not for the demons he battled in his own mind getting the better of him on multiple occasions, he could easily have been one of the biggest and most successful actors alive. He had already achieved such a level of success that he had been supporting his family, instead of the other way around. We will most likely never know just what was going on inside of Johnny Lewis's head, or what led him to become so violent. Especially after leaving a wildly successful show citing his dislike of violence as the reason. I will say there are conflicting reports prior to his death about him having a substance abuse issue in articles regarding him and his struggles. But people closer to him have said that he was never into that kind of thing. The lack of any substance in his system at the time of his death tells me that, at the time of the murder and his death, substance abuse was not his primary issue by any means. I think his demons were the intrusive and self-destructive thoughts that often plague many people, especially those who were on the creative end of the spectrum. I definitely feel that most of the violence that occurred in his life after the accident in 2011 could have been prevented, if the people who were witnessing his decline, and the professionals that he was dealing with during his jail sentences, had taken his mental health more serious, and gotten him the proper treatment. Then maybe Ms. Davis and Johnny Lewis would still be alive today. And yes, that is heavy speculation on our part, and a healthy dose of opinion that is based on my perspective, and comes from the context of someone that battles with a lot of these kind of issues. So, I hope you forgive my little deviation from my usual unbiased perspective, and indulge me in this. Whether you agree or disagree with that is entirely up to you. As usual, we're not trying to sway or convince anyone of anything, just sharing a really tragic story and offering some of our own thoughts and viewpoints on just what exactly happened that terrible day when two certified gems to the entertainment industry were lost forever. Hi, this story isn't mine directly, as it happened years before I was born, but it's been told to me in haunting detail by my mom, and it has lived inside of my mind ever since. It's about my aunt's daughter. Let's call her Tara. My aunt lived in a small 2-flat house back then, tucked away in a quiet town. Their neighbors were a family from another state, his wife and their son. The boy was very sick. It's some kind of deadly illness. The neighbors were deeply religious, and they worshipped a deity we weren't familiar with, and they would perform intense rituals, chanting in their native language. After these rituals, they would come over and offer the worshipped food to Tara. She was only 3. At first it seemed harmless, but it became a routine. Every special day they would call Tara over and hand her the food. Around the same time, strange things began happening. My aunt started noticing small scratch marks that looked like bite marks on Tara's arms and legs. But Tara was hyperactive. It was easy to brush it off as just part of being a child. Then came the weekend they left town. My aunt's family went to my grandfather's village for a short visit. They were away just 2 days, but when they returned, everything had changed. One afternoon, Tara was playing with her toys on the floor, laughing like always, and then suddenly she stopped. Blood started dripping from her nose, and then her mouth, then her ears, and she collapsed. They rushed her to the hospital, but she was gone. The doctors couldn't explain it. There was no accident, no visible trauma, just unexplained and unstoppable bleeding, and a 3-year-old child that had slipped away within minutes. The real horror revealed itself days later. A few neighbors from nearby towns came whispering stories they had heard about how that particular family, the neighbors, practiced a kind of dark ritual. It was a kind of human sacrifice voodoo, a ritual exchange, and they claimed to have offered Tara's soul to their deity in return for saving their own child. And the worst part is that the kid who was ill, he completely recovered. I don't know where to start from here, so I guess I'll just start off by saying what happened at the end of 2017. I was a new student at a small school in November of 2017. The size was around 50 kids in total. Yeah, I know, small, right? The reason I went there was because the things that I was learning in the old school were way too advanced for me. I had to transition into a school where the work was way easier and where I could focus better. It's called the Smith School, and it's based in New York City. It used to be a school for kids who had a criminal history. Now it's changed into a school with kids who have special needs. I was only there for almost a full year, and when I transferred into a bigger school, I was pretty much friends with everyone at that school, because the school was so small. I even ended up dating a guy. His name was Kyle Fernandez. I believe that I started dating him in February or March of 2018. The reason why he went to the Smith School is because he got kicked out from his previous school due to selling weed to the other students at that school, and one person ended up telling on him. In the first 2 to 3 months of dating him, he was nice to me and to the people that went to our school, but at the same time, he was also high on drugs for most of the time. I never smoked weed, and I never will. Kyle would also sometimes take me to hang out with his outside school friends. They were also a lot like him, smoking and selling, and they have their pants sag, which would reveal their underwear. It was so eye-burning to see that crap, but Kyle loved me and I loved him. While Kyle and his friends would do stuff that would get them in trouble, I would stay out of it. And, to my miracle, Kyle never pressured me to join along with them. A few more months went on and our relationship would stay the same, until one day in July where everything changed. On that day, Kyle came over to my place at nighttime. For an hour, we were just chatting in my bedroom until my phone kept going off. It was a bunch of text messages from my friend Liam. I opened iMessage and saw that he sent me a bunch of edgy but funny memes. I started laughing hard and Kyle then asked, "Who's texting you?" I told him that it was my friend Liam. He then asked me if he could see the texts. I then responded saying, "Please, it's really nothing. He's a longtime friend who makes me laugh all the time." Kyle then got really upset with me and demanded to look at my phone. My smile faded away. I now felt a little skittish, and I then muttered the word, "No." Take a guess on what happens next. I think you know. What Kyle did after I told him no was that he grabbed my phone and threw it into the wall. Glass went everywhere. On the floor, the lamp, the top of my drawer, and on my bed. I was in disbelief with what had just happened. As a reaction to what Kyle just did, I put my arms up to my face because I didn't know what he would do next. I then felt his hand grab my left arm, and then he did something that made me change how I saw him as a person. I saw the glass from my phone in his hand, and before I could say anything, Kyle plunged the glass into my arm so fast, and then took it out about 2 seconds later. I then screamed. I screamed so loud that probably Africa could even hear me. As I was still screaming, Kyle then screamed at me, "Are you happy now?" And then he ran out of my room and out of my apartment. I really wish my mother was home at the time, but of course, she wasn't. I then ran right to my bathroom and I washed the stab wound with soap and water. It was hurting like hell when I did that. Then I got this humongous bandage and put it on my left arm. After doing that, I went back to my phone, took the shattered screen protector off, and then proceeded to block Kyle on everything. If he tried to come and see me again, I would make it clear that I never wanted to see him again. To my shock, he never came to my house again, and I never saw him on the streets. But I did look around my surroundings to be safe, and I indeed was. I kept what Kyle did to me a secret, and when everyone else asked what happened between me and Kyle, I just said our relationship was just not going in the right direction. Everyone actually seemed to believe me. I didn't let anybody know what the real reason was, because I was just too scared. But me being scared all changed because of something else that happened in the summer of 2023. It was early August of 2023. I was at work that day, and while working, I felt my phone vibrating in my pocket. I took my phone out of my pocket to see who was calling me, and it was a 212 number. For the people that don't know, 212 is an area code number that is the home code in New York City. It wasn't my home phone because I knew my home phone number. I was curious to see what company was calling me, so I picked up the phone and said hello. I heard a woman on the line asking if this was me. I replied back saying, "Yeah, it's me, who's this?" I then heard the woman say, "This is 42nd Street, New York Presbyterian Hospital, Columbia Presbyterian Medical Center calling, and I'm here to inform you that your mother, along with 10 other people, have been hit by a car and she's in critical condition." As I heard this, I felt my hand shaking while holding the phone. I tried staying composed and said, "I'll be there right away." I ran out of my workplace so fast without telling anyone where I was going and what had happened. I got to the hospital in about 10 to 15 minutes. I asked where my mom was, and a woman at the front desk said that she was in a room right down the hall. I ran over to that room, and when I got to it, I saw that she was in a coma. I sat down next to her crying like I've never cried before in my life. A nurse came in and I asked her for the details of that incident. The nurse said that a man had stolen a car while intoxicated, and he drove onto a wrong-way street and then onto a sidewalk, striking a cyclist at first, and then he hit a woman, which was my mom, and about 5 others, and they all flew into each other. I was so taken back hearing this that I asked if they found out the guy's name yet. The nurse said, "We don't know yet, but we might get answers tomorrow." The next day then came, and there was amazing news and life-shattering news. I'll start off with the good news. The good news was that my mom had woken up. The bad news is that the person who drove that vehicle that hit my mother and 6 other people was someone who I knew very well. It was actually Kyle. I was in such incredulity. I was going to make sure that he was not going to get away with this. Thank God he'd been tackled by Good Samaritans on the street, and that the police had him in custody. I wanted to scream so badly, but I would just be humiliating myself by doing that. Another part about the bad news is that a couple of days later, I would find out that my mother will never be able to walk again. I felt as if my life was over. When this news story broke out all around the country, everyone thought this was a terrorist attack. They thought that because of 7 bodies all flying into each other. I also felt very self-assured that I would tell my experience of dating Kyle to the court and to the public, but keeping who I was private. I wrote a letter to the court where Kyle was at, and I wrote about the time that he assaulted me with the shattered glass of my phone that he had thrown. After this was read out in court, another woman who Kyle dated in 2022 came forward about how she was a victim of domestic violence from Kyle. This warmed my heart because she felt inspired to tell her story as well, and that we would stick together. In the end, Kyle was actually found guilty of his domestic violence on me and the other woman that he dated, and for his drunk driving case. After he was found guilty, he was sentenced to 2.5 years behind bars. That sentence is way too short. It should be 20 years because of the 7 victims he unintentionally hit with the car, and leaving most of them with lifetime injuries. He must have hired an amazing lawyer because of such a short sentence. I have nothing but hatred for Kyle now after he changed my mother's life for the worse. People like him never change. I know I might be taking things out of proportion, but I'm never going to get over this. And this is how I really feel. While Kyle is serving his time in prison, I hope that he reflects on his actions that he did to hurt people and goes to rehab where he can change as a person. My advice to him is that he needs to move out of New York City, which is a very toxic environment, and start a new life where he helps people instead of hurting people. If anyone's interested, there is a video of Kyle getting tackled online everywhere, and it went viral. The video shows Kyle getting tackled by 3 men and being confronted about what he did. He would deny that he did it, which showed that he is a liar and has no remorse by running away, and not even checking up on the people that he hit. For the people living in New York City, when Kyle gets out of the prison and you see him on the streets, avoid him at all costs because you don't want to be his next victim. Hi, Raven. So, this story is a bit different than your traditional scary story, but I wanted to share this to help people understand the power of hurricanes. Hurricanes, especially major hurricanes, should never be underestimated. For some backstory, me and my brother are hurricane chasers. Not professionals or anything, but we chase them for the thrill. We've experienced several hurricanes, including Hurricanes Sally, Idalia, and Ian. My brother and I have been through many hurricanes together, experiencing extreme winds well over 100 miles per hour and heavy rain. However, a few months ago we decided to chase Hurricane Helene, which was aimed to make landfall somewhere between Tallahassee, Florida and Perry, Florida. We decided to stay in Gandy Motor Lodge, a motel in Perry, Florida, which we also stayed in during Hurricane Idalia. As we settled in, we had water and food ready at the motel in case we got stranded. Hurricane Idalia was the strongest hurricane we had experienced. The eye of Idalia slightly jogged to our east, but we still experienced the extreme wind gusts, likely over 120 miles per hour, from the eye wall, which is the strongest part of the storm. It caused some damage to Gandy Motor Lodge, but we didn't even realize it until after the hurricane had passed, as we were outside during the entire eye wall. So, on to our experience in Hurricane Helene. As we monitored the hurricane, it continued to strengthen and we knew the winds were likely to be extreme, but it was nothing we hadn't experienced before. As the outer part of the eye wall began to come ashore, we ventured outside and experienced strong winds and rain exceeding hurricane force, but nothing that we hadn't previously been through. However, a particularly strong gust of wind, likely greater than 100 miles per hour, made us decide to head back to the motel as we were concerned about flying debris that we couldn't see in the night. As we went back into the motel, we decided to watch it from the patio of our motel room. However, debris continued to fly and gutters began flying everywhere. We actually grabbed a stray gutter which had broken off the building and put it inside of our hotel room. We continued to watch the hurricane from outside our door, realizing the wind was greater than any previous hurricane we'd had experienced. For some context, we stayed in Venice, Florida for Hurricane Ian and were only scraped by the eye wall. As Hurricane Helene continued to come ashore, we realized it was becoming too dangerous to stay outside, and furthermore the power went out, causing us to be able to see any of the flying debris. As Helene roared outside, I grabbed a chair from our motel room and braced it against the door, worried that the door might give way due to the extreme winds. We were under an extreme wind warning, which is only issued for winds that could approach tornado-like wind. While we were nervous, I recorded the winds whistling against the motel door. It sounded very eerie and we were getting concerned. And soon after, we began hearing breaking noises that sounded as though the building was beginning to become compromised. This scared the hell out of me and my brother, as we had never experienced anything like this before. In hindsight, we were in less danger than we realized, but At the time, we were truly terrified. As the structure of our motel continued to moan, break, and crack under the pressure of the wind of Hurricane Helene, we decided to huddle in the bathtub of our motel. The winds continued to increase, and my brother and I were praying for it to stop. Each gust worse than the last as we heard creaks, breaks, and damage occurring to the motel. We continued to check the radar, praying for the calm of the eye to come, as we knew the eye would bring a huge decease in winds and provide some calm. Finally, after 15 minutes of huddling in the bathtub, the eye came over, providing relief from the extreme winds. At the beginning of the eye and calm winds, my brother and I heard a loud thud outside of our motel room and realized the entire awning outside our motel had collapsed, allowing only a tiny space for us to walk through. Me and my brother checked on the motel owner, who also chose to ride out the storm, and he was okay, thankfully. The second part of the eye wall was way less severe, and we finally were able to get some sleep later that night. While I don't regret this experience, I certainly have gained a much greater respect for the power of nature. The hurricanes are no joke, and should be respected. Me and my brother also feel horrible for those who were affected by Hurricane Helene and the loss of life that occurred during the severe flooding in North Carolina. And stay safe, and unless you know what you're doing, please heed the warnings and get out while you still can. We could have easily been injured. My brother's car could have been damaged or destroyed, and we were fortunate that all we experienced was a good scare. This isn't my story, but my grandma's. It's what she heard that night. My uncle was hit and later succumbed to his injuries. So this is my paternal grandma, and she's lived in an apartment in the basement of my parents' house for my entire life. And my paternal grandpa, her husband, passed away at the age of 53 in October of 92. I was born in 97, so I sadly never got to meet him. Growing up, my uncle, my dad's only brother, lived next door to us. He was not married and never had kids to my knowledge. Well, fast forward to September of 2014. My parents are out of town celebrating their wedding anniversary. It was probably around 9 o'clock at night, and I see my uncle pull out of the driveway, and I waved goodbye to him and then just go inside. Then my grandma goes to bed, so no one is up but me. It's about 11 o'clock now, and I then get a phone call from my mom that I need to go wake up my brother to take my grandma to the hospital, because my uncle was involved in a car accident and was at the hospital. And we needed to get there, so I needed to wake up my brother. In we go. We got my grandma, and we all headed up to the hospital. My uncle sadly did not make it. He passed away in October of 2014 at the age of 53. This next part I didn't find out until quite a few years later, and my grandma and I were talking about it one day, and she told me that she was laying in bed, and right before my brother knocked on her door, she heard someone say, "We're dead." I know where my grandma was at in the house, and she wouldn't have been able to hear anyone else in the house say anything unless they were right in her room. I kind of asked her about it, and she thinks that it was my uncle saying that he was dead, and he was with my grandpa again. My uncle was in a coma that he never woke up from after the accident. He was pretty much gone the moment it happened. My family kinda low-key joked around with my dad, who was not quite 53 yet, that we were going to keep him in the house the entire year after he turned 53, because we didn't want anything to happen to him, because the men in his family do not have a good track record when it comes to the age of 53. Hi, Raven. I've been a listener for years now and finally have gotten around to writing out a few stories. This one is a little shorter, but still creeps me out to this day. When I was younger, probably around 11 or 12, I was playing a game of Disney Princess Checkers with my younger brother on the floor of my childhood bedroom, when, out of nowhere, I hear knocking on my bedroom window. The kind of knocking when you're knocking on someone's door. We lock eyes, and as my eyes fill with tears, I whispered to my brother, "Did you hear that knocking?" And he shakes his head yes with a horrified look on his face. My blinds were shut and curtains closed, and I was too afraid to look, so I ran to my dad screaming that there was someone knocking on my window. He says, "Well, it's actually impossible, but I'll go check." I follow behind him, and of course, nothing was out there. Well, the kicker to this story is that my childhood bedroom is on the second floor of the house, with absolutely nothing around it since we have a porch right below it, so there's nothing within 20 feet of my window either. Just a creepy story from my childhood that stuck with me and is still left unanswered. Although I'm not sure that I would like to know the answer, but if you have any ideas, be my guest. October 9th, 2024 was the worst moment of my life. It was around 1 a.m. in Bridgeport, Connecticut, and I, along with some other officers, responded to a call about a man being unstable and acting erratically. We arrived at the house, and another officer knocked on the door. We saw two men come to the door. One was with a round hat, and the other one just had a bald head. They just stood there without a response. The same officer, along with me, both knocked on the door a second time. After the knock, I told the man with the hat who was standing in front of the other man to unlock the door. He then turned his back to us as he was blocking the other guy from unlocking the door. I then decided that I was going to unlock the door with a small pocket knife that I would always carry while on duty. I kept attempting, but I failed. Meanwhile, the bald guy was able to get past the man in the hat, and he unlocked the door for us. After he unlocked the door, things started to get more intensely crazy. Me and the other officer were still by the door, and at that time, I didn't know what was in his pockets, nor did I look. But as the door was not even fully opened yet, the man in the hat just started walking out to his right, which is where I was, and said straight to my face, "I'm gonna effing kill you." He then took something from his right pocket of his coat. Then he lunged at me with the object, and I felt a knife stab into my shoulder, and then it being taken out. I couldn't react fast enough as he then stabbed me in the neck and took it out, which I couldn't speak or breathe. He then stabbed me in the head and took the knife out again, which made me start to lose consciousness. I pushed the guy off me with all the force I had left, and then I started to go blurry. I stepped off the front porch and onto the side grass. I couldn't maintain focus anymore, and my eyes were looking down at the grass below me. As I was looking down, I heard 2 gunshots and then heard all of the officers say to drop the knife and to put the knife down for a good 30 seconds. Medics also arrived at about the same time the commotion ended. I was then rushed to the hospital, where I stayed for 4 days and then went home afterwards. As I'm writing this, I've now made a full recovery. The guy who stabbed me got shot twice in the spine and is never going to walk again. He's still awaiting trial as he's currently being held in a county jail. Have you ever had that feeling of being moments away from death? Well, that's what I felt. Thank God the doctors were kind enough to save my life. I'm still working as a police officer, and I don't plan to quit anytime soon. This was in the late 80s, and I was 6 years old. My family went to SeaWorld in California. It was me, my parents, and my 12-year-old brother. We all remember this, exactly the same way, even 35 years later. We don't talk about it much, though, because my family isn't really into paranormal and it weirds us all out. Okay, so we'd been at the park all day and it was starting to get dark. I started noticing the seals or sea otters or whatever being extremely loud, and an employee noted that it was unusual. Suddenly, every animal was acting up. The dolphins I had been petting not long ago were swimming wildly in circles, splashing water, penguins were flailing around, etc. After a bit of this, every light in the entire park goes off. In an instant, we're all in darkness. My mom's hand tightened around mine, and I could see that she was nervous. My 6-year-old self could feel the fear before that, and looking around at the barely visible faces in the moonlight, everyone was spooked. That's where it actually got terrifying. A voice, not a crackly intercom voice that you can't even decipher, but about 20 times louder, a very clear male voice that seemed to be booming straight from the skies. It was coming from nowhere and everywhere. Started to recite Bible verses. Bible verses from Acts. About the end of the world. I distinctly remember him saying to turn away from your sins and repent, and other end of the world verses. Most people looked terrified, but one employee was laughing, but it seemed like nervous laughter. She was trying to play it off, but everyone else was freaked out. We are actually Christians and still are to this day, but we weren't quite ready for Armageddon. After about 5 to 10 minutes of this, the voice stopped. The lights, all at once, came back on, and everything went back to normal. My 6-year-old brain, trying to process what had happened as we were still in the park, started thinking maybe they just had better intercom sounds than most places, or something like that, and it was just a joke. But then the announcement came, telling us that it was a joke or that they didn't know what had happened or something like that. I don't really know because it was way too crackly and muffled to understand. So much for the sound quality theory. Hi, Raven. I was in my late 20s, a hairdresser, and lived in the east of the Netherlands. I regularly cut the hair of a woman from my neighborhood at her home. Her husband was often at home, so I knew him a little bit at this point. When I was cutting her hair again, I told her that I was going to Amsterdam for a night that coming weekend. The man overheard the conversation and said that he was also going to Amsterdam that weekend to meet a friend from college. When I was done and about to leave, I said to the man with the wink, "Well, I'll see you this weekend then." And he chuckled, and that was that. That weekend, I went to Amsterdam with my boyfriend at the time, and when we arrived, we wanted something to eat first. We didn't know Amsterdam that well, so we went into the first cafe we came across. You know, Amsterdam is a big city with many cafes, right? We walked to a table, and when we wanted to sit down there, I looked up toward the bar. And who was sitting there with his friend from college? Exactly. The husband of the woman whose hair I had cut that week. This was a very awkward moment, I can tell you that. Hi, Raven. I have a few stories for you. I have a semi-nonverbal 15-year-old autistic son. The first event happened when he was about 6 or 7. He did not talk at that time. He would say 1 or 2 words max, not conversations or anything complex. We lived by 3 cemeteries, one next to another. I took up tombstone cleaning as a hobby. I only cleaned stones from the 1800s and researched the person who lay there. I was able to get pretty detailed cemetery records and genealogy records through our library. I cleaned a stone of a young girl about 17 years old who died in the late 1800s from TB. Later, I was driving around the cemetery checking out the stones with my son. He was sitting in the back minding his own world. Later that evening, after his bath, I was getting him ready to go to bed. He sits up in his bed and points to the hallway and says, "Girl sad." I ask him, "What girl?" And he responds, "Girl sad. Girl crying," and points to the hallway. We were not watching scary movies around him. He wasn't interested in anything other than Pixar's car movies, so I don't think he was talking about anything he saw on TV. Second story. My son was around 10 years old at this time. We were going to go shopping at the shopping center. A year before, a very nice and popular young woman was unalived in the parking lot by her ex with a firearm. The whole town talked about it, but neither my husband or I mentioned anything about it at home, especially in front of him. We didn't watch conventional TV at all, and I doubt this subject was talked about in his special needs class either. And so we get into the parking lot of the shopping center, and he points to the far side of the lot where a small memorial shrine was in her memory, and says, "Girl dead, girl shot." I was just looking at him, wondering how he knew that. Hey, I just wanted to tell you about a few times that I encouraged some weird things. They aren't as unusual as your other stuff, but a teen can get her ways sometimes. Anyway, the first time is from a few months ago. Me and my older sister, let's call her Macy, we were in my room at my dad's house after school. We were just talking about something, and she suddenly asks, "Do you want to try to talk to the ghosts here?" I nodded, not knowing exactly how it would work. Macy sat beside me and kind of summoned the ghost. I knew because it took over my voice and body. Like it possessed me without doing anything. She asked a few questions. The answers were vague, mostly. We asked if there was anything to look out for, and the answer creeped us out. Afterwards, I could still feel the ghost inside of my body, as it shook me so much. I don't know if I should be careful or not, but I always felt like something is watching me ever since we did this.